On a fateful day, the 15th of October 2021, a distress call summoned the police to an apartment complex on Oak Street. The gruesome discovery that awaited them would linger in their memories for years to come. They found the lifeless body of Ethan Reed, a cherished local high school teacher aged 32, lying in a pool of his own blood. The main suspect was his girlfriend of 2 years, Olivia Rogan, a 29-year-old software engineer. As the investigation delved deeper, a chilling web of surveillance, manipulation, and escalating control was uncovered. This sinister network had ensnared Ethan in the months preceding his death. Hidden cameras, strategically placed throughout his apartment, revealed a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. The roots of Olivia Rogan's transformation into the central figure of a tragic true crime story stretch back to long before she crossed paths with Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia was raised in a middle-class suburb of Portland. Those close to the family observed Olivia's intense craving for attention and validation from an early age. Reflecting on her daughter's childhood in an interview following Olivia's arrest, Margaret Rogan shared her thoughts. Olivia was an exceptionally bright child, always leading her class, but she found it difficult to maintain lasting friendships, Margaret reminisced. Initially, I assumed it was merely shyness, but as she grew older, I observed how possessive she could be of her few friends. If they spent time with other children, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn. This tendency persisted into Olivia's adolescent years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later revealed to investigators Olivia's incessant need to know his whereabouts. She would call or text nonstop when we weren't together, he stated. If I didn't respond promptly, she'd appear wherever she believed I might be. I assumed it was because she cared deeply. Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was there that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, remembered Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. She was brilliant at it, Sarah said, but sometimes it felt like she was using her skills to keep tabs on everyone around her. She'd casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't possibly have known without some kind of digital snooping. After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues described her as driven and meticulous, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans, he said. When I tried to set boundaries, she'd become angry or manipulative. It was exhausting. By the time Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020, accepting a remote position with her company, she had left a trail of broken relationships behind her. Yet those who knew her couldn't have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed's life stood in stark contrast to Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing," Amanda said. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh. From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had an infectious enthusiasm for literature. "I always thought he'd make an excellent teacher someday." Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by steady, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. "Ethan was always so balanced," she said. "He valued his independence but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We broke up because our career paths were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama." The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to life in Ashland, had ventured out to explore her new surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met across a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his easygoing nature and warm smile, found herself lingering at the stall far longer than she'd intended. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love of classic literature and hiking. Ethan, impressed by Olivia's quick wit and intelligence, suggested they meet up for a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak, offering breathtaking views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, Ethan came back from that hike on cloud 9. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they talked for hours without a lull in the conversation. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed rapidly. They spent long evenings discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of Southern Oregon. To those around them, they seemed like a perfect match. However, even in these early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister, Amanda, noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time. She'd call or text constantly when they weren't together, and she always seemed to have a reason why Ethan couldn't join family gatherings without her, Amanda said. Ethan, blinded by the excitement of new love, brushed off these early red flags. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "It'll calm down once we're more settled." Little did Ethan know that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually tighten around him, slowly cutting him off from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had all but moved into Ethan's apartment. Despite him never officially asking her to live with him, she began to exert influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Ethan's colleague and friend, fellow English teacher Jessica Lawson, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to after-school happy hours, something he'd always enjoyed before, Jessica recalled. When I asked him about it, he said Olivia wasn't comfortable with him being out late. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his usually active Facebook and Instagram accounts became sparse, with posts becoming infrequent and impersonal. When questioned, Ethan would brush it off, saying he was trying to be more private online. But it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most alarm bells. Amanda Reed remembered a particularly disturbing incident during the 2020 holiday season. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. "But that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said Olivia wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay with her. But I could hear her in the background sounding perfectly fine." Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her grip on Ethan. She would oscillate between lavishing him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't comply with her wishes. Ethan's friend Mark recounted a camping trip they had planned for months. "The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel," Mark said. "He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset he was going away without her, even though she'd been invited and had declined." As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity, despite having no evidence to support her claims. She would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch, but colleagues noted how she seemed to be scanning the room as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Emma Chen, one of Ethan's students, later testified to a disturbing encounter. "Miss Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive." Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noted his increasing stress and anxiety, but he would deflect their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister, Amanda, confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. "I told him I was worried that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship," Amanda said. "But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she'd been hurt in the past and needed extra reassurance. He truly believed he could help her overcome her insecurities." As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible. and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small, high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also set up sophisticated software that would allow her to access the feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On the Friday afternoon that Ethan left for his conference, Olivia sprang into action. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, which gave her unfettered access. Over the next several hours, she carefully placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would allay her fears and allow her to trust Ethan completely. The first few days of monitoring proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than easing her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began to obsess over minor details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he waiting to meet out the window? Olivia's colleague, David Cho, later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone, David said. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep suffered, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One evening, while reaching for a book on his shelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He distinctly remembered organizing them just days before. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed rearranged, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly how. More unsettling were the times he felt as if he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a prickle on the back of his neck, as if someone's eyes were on him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Ethan's friend and fellow teacher, Jessica Lawson, recalled a conversation they had during this period. He mentioned feeling on edge in his own home, Jessica said. He laughed it off, saying he was probably just stressed about work, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior added to Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known about. Once, she mentioned in passing that she liked the new brand of coffee he'd bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, though he was certain he hadn't mentioned it to her. When Ethan would express confusion about these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or provide vague explanations. He must have mentioned the coffee in passing, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan found himself second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. Am I just being paranoid? He wondered. Is the stress of work getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister, Amanda, but hesitated, worried that his suspicions might sound absurd or that he might be overreacting. The moment of revelation came on an October evening in 2021. Ethan had been grading papers late into the night. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated the living room as he stretched and prepared to call it a night. His elbow knocked a small potted plant off the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, soil and ceramic shards scattering across the room. As Ethan knelt to clean up the mess, something caught his eye amidst the debris. A tiny lens no bigger than a pencil eraser glinted in the low light. His heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a miniature camera, expertly concealed within the plant's base. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras in the smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind reeled as he pieced together the implications. The strange comments Olivia had made, her uncanny knowledge of his daily activities, the feeling of being watched, it all suddenly made horrifying sense. The woman he had loved and trusted had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. In a daze, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister, Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Through a voice choked with emotion, Ethan recounted his discovery. Amanda listened in shocked silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, to demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb with betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross invasion of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's steady voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras, save any recordings you can find. We'll go to the police in the morning." As the first light of dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep breath, he typed out a response that would set in motion the final tragic act of their relationship. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable as Olivia arrived later that morning. She entered with her usual smile, leaning in for a kiss, but froze when she saw Ethan's grim expression and the array of dismantled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice quavering. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, cut her off. He spoke of trust betrayed, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep-seated insecurities, her fear of losing him, her conviction that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax into their relationship. Her words came out in a rush, pleading and explanatory, but Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "We're done, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood firm in his decision, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she'd captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute, even as his heart broke at the sight of Olivia's desperation. He knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no coming back from this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words were having no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a far more dangerous turn. The events of October 15th, 2021 would forever be etched in the memories of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no indication of the tragedy that would unfold. Ethan, emotionally drained from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to take a walk to clear his head, leaving his phone behind to avoid any desperate messages from Olivia. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final, fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face set in a mask of determination. She used her key to let herself in, her mind racing with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of righteous indignation. When Ethan returned home around 7 p.m., he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a jolt of fear through him. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice shaky. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we belong together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia vacillated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with bitter accusations. Ethan, his patience exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. It was then that Olivia's fragile control snapped. In a move that would shock even those who knew of her obsessive tendencies, she produced a kitchen knife she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia even as he backed away from the blade. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that ensued, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler came into play. He managed to grapple with Olivia, trying to disarm her without causing harm. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time police broke down the door of Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already played out to its grim conclusion. They found Ethan on the floor, with multiple stab wounds marking his body. The life was already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics rushed in, futilely attempting to save Ethan's life, Olivia offered no resistance when the police took her into custody. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda, in particular, struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a tearful interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shell-shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The district attorney presented a methodical case, walking the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. Covert surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense didn't contest the basic facts of the case. Instead, they focused on Olivia's mental state, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony an unsettling mixture of remorse and rationalization. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never meant to hurt him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom disturbed. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashland slowly healed, the community was left to reflect on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not just for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic relationship dynamics before they escalate to tragedy.
In the serene and idyllic town of Pine Hill, the brutal slaying of Jennifer Johnson sent a wave of shock and disbelief through the community. The seemingly harmonious and tight-knit suburban haven was rocked by a crime fueled by passion and deceit, revealing the hidden darkness beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives. This is the story of two couples, Daniel and Linda Garner, and Mark and Jennifer Johnson, whose lives became intertwined in a web of obsession, deception, and ultimately murder. Daniel Garner, a well-respected architect admired for his charming personality and successful career, was married to Linda, a devoted schoolteacher. Mark Johnson, a prosperous financial advisor, was married to Jennifer, a woman known for her captivating beauty and charisma. The two couples were more than just neighbors. They were the closest of friends, sharing weekend getaways, barbecues, and a consensual wife-swapping arrangement. What began as an exciting and novel addition to their lives soon turned sinister, as Daniel's fascination with Jennifer grew into an all-consuming obsession. Linda, aware of her husband's growing fixation on Jennifer, tried to ignore it, hoping it was just a passing phase. Jennifer, however, sensed the intensity of Daniel's feelings and decided to end the arrangement, unaware of the deadly consequences that would follow. The Garners had been married for a decade, and their union appeared to be one of happiness and stability. Daniel's innovative designs and charismatic nature made him a successful architect, while Linda, a beloved third-grade teacher, was admired by her colleagues and students alike. The Johnsons moved to Pine Hill 5 years prior and quickly befriended the Garners. Mark, an outgoing financial advisor, and Jennifer, a woman of striking beauty, brought a new energy to the neighborhood, and their friendship with the Garners blossomed. The idea of wife swapping was first introduced during a dinner party at the Garners' residence. Fueled by wine and a sense of adventure, the conversation turned to open relationships. Surprisingly, the concept was met with intrigue rather than disapproval. Over the following weeks, the idea was discussed more seriously, with all parties agreeing to boundaries and rules to protect their primary relationships. The first encounter, though awkward, was exciting, and the couples found themselves eager for more. What started as an occasional experiment soon became a regular part of their lives, adding excitement to both marriages. Initially, the arrangement seemed to work well, with both couples appearing happier and more connected. They continued to socialize, hosting joint parties and going on vacations together, all while carefully guarding their secret. However, as the months passed, subtle changes began to emerge, particularly in Daniel's behavior. Daniel's growing interest in Jennifer became evident, as he found reasons to spend time alone with her. Linda noticed his preoccupation, but chose to ignore it, hoping it was just a phase. Mark, however, remained oblivious to the growing tension. Unbeknownst to the others, Daniel's fascination with Jennifer was evolving into something deeper and more troubling. His constant thoughts about her and their encounters consumed him, and what had started as a harmless adventure was slowly turning into an obsession with devastating consequences. Daniel's infatuation with Jennifer grew into an all-consuming obsession, dominating his thoughts during work meetings and family dinners. His architectural projects, once his passion, now seemed secondary to his desire for Jennifer. He started finding ways to be near her, volunteering to help with tasks Mark usually handled, or inviting the Johnsons over more frequently. Linda began to notice the change in her husband, attributing it to the excitement of their new lifestyle at first. However, it soon became clear that Daniel's interest in Jennifer went beyond their agreement. One evening, while cleaning up after a dinner party, Linda confronted Daniel about his growing obsession with Jennifer. His reaction was defensive, dismissing her concerns as jealousy. Linda, not wanting to disrupt their delicate balance, let it go but kept a closer eye on him. Her suspicions grew when she found him staring at Jennifer during gatherings, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. Jennifer, too, began to sense Daniel's growing obsession, initially flattered by his attention, but soon finding it uncomfortable. The turning point came during a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin, where Daniel's fixation on Jennifer became increasingly apparent. He monopolized her time, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone, leaving Mark and Linda behind. The tension was palpable, and Jennifer's attempts to distance herself were met with subtle resistance from Daniel. One night, while sitting by the fire, Daniel made a comment that crossed the line, suggesting they leave everything behind and start fresh together. Jennifer, shocked and unsettled, excused herself and went to bed early. Linda, who had overheard the conversation, confronted Daniel again, this time less dismissive but still refusing to acknowledge the depth of his feelings. Linda's frustration grew as she realized the extent of Daniel's obsession, fearing it could destroy their marriage and their friendship with the Johnsons. Despite her efforts to intervene, Daniel's behavior only became more erratic, following Jennifer outside of their arranged meetings and showing up at her workplace under the guise of casual visits. Jennifer's unease turned to fear, and she confided in a close friend who advised her to distance herself from Daniel as much as possible. Determined to take control, Jennifer decided to end the arrangement altogether, hoping that by doing so, Daniel would return to his senses and they could all move on from this chapter without causing further harm. One evening, while Mark was away on a business trip, Daniel showed up at the Johnsons' house unannounced. Jennifer, taken aback, let him in, hoping to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, the air thick with tension, as Daniel confessed his feelings for her, speaking of a future where they could be together openly. Jennifer, horrified, tried to reason with him, explaining that their arrangement was never meant to be more than a temporary excitement. As Daniel's declarations became more intense, Jennifer's fear turned to anger, and she realized she needed to put an end to this before it destroyed her marriage and her friendship with Linda. Jennifer told Daniel firmly that their arrangement was over, and that he needed to respect her boundaries and her marriage. Daniel, visibly shaken, tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Jennifer stood her ground. Over the next few days, Jennifer avoided Daniel, hoping he would come to his senses. She confided in Linda, who listened with a heavy heart, feeling a twisted loyalty to Daniel despite wanting to support Jennifer. Linda promised Jennifer she would talk to him, hoping to defuse the situation. However, Daniel's obsession only deepened, and he started showing up at Jennifer's work, waiting for her after hours and leaving her messages expressing his undying love. Jennifer, feeling increasingly unsafe, decided to confront him one last time, hoping to make him understand the gravity of his actions. They met at a secluded park, away from prying eyes, where Jennifer reiterated that their arrangement was over and that his behavior was unacceptable. She pleaded with him to let go and move on, but Daniel, unable to accept her rejection, grew desperate. Unbeknownst to them, Linda had followed Daniel to the park, watching from a distance as the confrontation unfolded. She could see the anguish on Daniel's face and the determination on Jennifer's, knowing that this confrontation was inevitable, but also fearing what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Daniel's desperation turned to anger, and Jennifer's refusal to entertain his fantasies felt like a personal betrayal. He lashed out verbally, calling her names and accusing her of ruining his life. Jennifer, maintaining her composure, insisted that they part ways and return to their respective marriages. Linda, watching from the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to intervene before things got out of hand. She stepped out of her hiding place and approached the two, her voice shaking as she called out to Daniel. The sight of Linda seemed to snap Daniel out of his rage, and he turned to her, his expression a mix of confusion and relief. Jennifer, taking advantage of the distraction, walked away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Daniel as possible. Linda, now alone with her husband, tried to calm him down, reassuring him that they would find a way to move past this. Inside, however, she knew that their lives had been irreversibly changed. The affair had reached its breaking point, and Jennifer's decision to end the arrangement had set off a chain of events that could not be undone. The confrontation at the park left Daniel in a state of turmoil. Jennifer's firm rejection and Linda's unexpected appearance had shaken him to his core. He returned home that night, his mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and despair. Linda, sensing the storm brewing within him, tried to soothe his troubled thoughts, but Daniel remained inconsolable. Over the next few days, Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic, vacillating between bouts of intense anger and deep despondency. He stopped going to work, spending his days obsessing over Jennifer's rejection and the perceived injustices he had suffered. Linda, unable to reach him, felt her own frustration and fear growing. She knew something had to give, but she wasn't prepared for the drastic turn of events that would soon unfold. Jennifer, on the other hand, was determined to move forward. She avoided all contact with Daniel, focusing on her work and her relationship with Mark. She hadn't told her husband the full extent of Daniel's obsession, fearing his reaction and the potential fallout. She hoped that by cutting ties, Daniel would eventually come to terms with the end of their arrangement and leave her alone. One evening, Jennifer returned home from work to find Daniel waiting for her outside her house. Her heart sank at the sight of him, and she steeled herself for another confrontation. She approached him cautiously, her voice steady but firm as she told him to leave. Daniel, his eyes wild with desperation, begged her for one last chance to explain himself. Jennifer, sensing the futility of the conversation, tried to walk past him, but Daniel grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful. Jennifer struggled to break free, her voice rising as she demanded he let go. The commotion attracted the attention of a neighbor who stepped outside to see what was happening. Seeing the neighbor, Daniel released Jennifer and fled. Jennifer, shaken and frightened, thanked the neighbor and hurried inside. She called Linda, hoping to find some way to resolve the situation without involving the police. Linda, hearing the fear in Jennifer's voice, agreed to meet with her the next day to discuss how to handle Daniel's increasingly unstable behavior. The next day, Linda met Jennifer at a local cafe. Jennifer, looking exhausted and tense, explained the encounter with Daniel and her growing fear for her safety. Linda listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. She promised Jennifer that she would talk to Daniel and make him understand that their relationship was over. After the meeting, Linda returned home to find Daniel in a state of agitation. She confronted him about the incident with Jennifer, her voice a mix of anger and concern. Daniel, feeling cornered, lashed out at her, accusing her of taking Jennifer's side and betraying him. The argument escalated, and Linda, fearing for her own safety, retreated to their bedroom. That night, Daniel's thoughts turned darker. He couldn't accept that Jennifer had rejected him and that his own wife was against him. In his twisted mind, he believed that the only way to resolve the situation was to eliminate the source of his pain. He decided that if he couldn't have Jennifer, no one could. On a cold, clear night, Daniel made his way to the Johnsons' house. He knew Mark was out of town, leaving Jennifer alone. He broke in through a side window and made his way to the bedroom where Jennifer lay sleeping. The sight of her peaceful and unaware fueled his rage and desperation. He grabbed a kitchen knife and approached her, his mind filled with a chaotic mix of love and hatred. Jennifer awoke to the sight of Daniel standing over her, the knife gleaming in the dim light. She tried to scream, but Daniel covered her mouth, his grip strong and unyielding. In a fit of rage, he plunged the knife into her chest, silencing her cries as Jennifer's life slipped away. In the aftermath of the murder, Daniel fled the scene, his hands stained with Jennifer's blood. He returned home, where Linda found him trembling and incoherent. She realized immediately what he had done, and in a moment of twisted loyalty, she decided to help him cover up the crime. The life they had built, the secrets they had kept, were all at stake. Linda knew that if they were to survive, they needed to act quickly and decisively. Driven by a twisted sense of loyalty and self-preservation, Linda quickly took control of the situation. She led Daniel to the bathroom, instructing him to remove his clothes and wash off the blood. Her mind raced with the urgency of their predicament, knowing they had to act fast to cover up the crime and protect their secret life. Once Daniel was cleaned up, she sat him down and forced him to recount every detail of what had happened. Despite his emotional state, Daniel managed to provide a coherent account, his voice shaking with the weight of his actions. Linda devised a plan. They needed to create an alibi and dispose of any evidence linking them to the crime. She called a trusted friend, claiming that Daniel had been with her all evening, ensuring their alibi was backed up. Then she drove to a secluded area outside of town, where she burned Daniel's blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon, praying that the fire would consume any remaining evidence. The police questioned everyone in the neighborhood, including the Garners. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel, though visibly distressed, managed to avoid raising suspicion. The investigation seemed to stall, with no concrete leads pointing to the Garners. Despite their initial success in evading the authorities, the psychological toll of the murder weighed heavily on both Daniel and Linda. Daniel became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He withdrew from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Linda, while outwardly composed, felt the strain of their secret pressing down on her. She became hypervigilant, scrutinizing every interaction and behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. The weeks following Jennifer's murder were a blur of tension and deception for the Garners. Linda took on the role of the stabilizer, managing Daniel's paranoia while ensuring their public facade remained intact. She monitored the news for any updates on the investigation, relieved that the police seemed to have no solid leads. However, Linda knew that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed to create a narrative that would divert attention away from Daniel. She suggested to Daniel that he should appear more distraught over Jennifer's death, aligning himself with the community's grief and throwing off any suspicion. At social gatherings and community meetings, Daniel played the part of the grieving friend. He spoke of Jennifer with a mix of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Mark, devastated and desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Daniel's empathy, never suspecting his friend's involvement in his wife's death. Daniel's mental state deteriorated further, his guilt manifesting in nightmares and hallucinations. He started drinking heavily, seeking solace in alcohol but finding only temporary escape. Linda, fearing he might confess in a drunken stupor, kept a close eye on him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house. One evening, as Daniel sat slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down. He confessed to Linda that he couldn't live with the guilt any longer, and that he needed to come clean. Linda, panicked, tried to calm him down, suggesting they take a short trip out of town. They traveled to a secluded cabin in the mountains, hoping the change of scenery would help Daniel regain some semblance of peace. The isolation provided a temporary respite, allowing them to plan their next steps without the constant pressure of the investigation looming over them. During their time at the cabin, Linda reinforced the importance of their secrecy. She coached Daniel on how to handle police questioning and public interaction, drilling him until he could respond without hesitation. Linda's determination to protect their lifestyle and avoid imprisonment fueled her relentless drive to keep their story straight. Upon returning to Pine Hill, the Garners resumed their lives with a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel, though still haunted by his actions, managed to present a more stable front. Linda continued to manage their interactions with the community, ensuring they remained above suspicion. However, the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Daniel's increased drinking and erratic behavior, and whispers of his possible involvement in Jennifer's death began to circulate. Linda, ever vigilant, worked to quash the rumors, but she knew their time was running out. As the police investigation continued, new evidence came to light, pointing towards inconsistencies in Daniel's alibi. The Garners' carefully constructed world was on the brink of collapse, and the truth was closer to being revealed than ever before. Detective Mitchell interviewed the Garners separately, noting any discrepancies in their stories. Linda's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and Daniel's emotional state seemed consistent with that of a grieving friend. However, Mitchell's instincts told her there was more to the story. As the weeks passed, new evidence emerged. Forensic analysis of Jennifer's phone records revealed a series of increasingly desperate text messages from Daniel, indicating his obsession with her. Mitchell brought Daniel in for further questioning, pressing him on the inconsistencies in his alibi and the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. Daniel, struggling to maintain his composure, stuck to the story Linda had coached him on, but his nervousness and evasive answers only heightened the detective's suspicions. The turning point came when a neighbor came forward with crucial information. They had seen Daniel's car parked near the Johnsons' house on the night of the murder, and remembered the strange behavior he had exhibited. This testimony, combined with the forensic evidence and Daniel's erratic behavior, was enough for the police to obtain a search warrant for the Garners' home. During the search, the police found remnants of the burned clothing and traces of blood that had seeped into the floorboards, despite Linda's thorough cleaning. This damning evidence, coupled with the witness testimony and phone records, painted a clear picture of Daniel's guilt. The net was closing in on the Garners, and Linda realized that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. She knew that their only chance of escaping a lengthy prison sentence was to come up with a new plan, one that would shift the blame away from them and onto someone else. As the police closed in, Linda and Daniel faced the harsh reality of their situation. The lies and deceit that had once protected them were now threatening to unravel completely, and the truth was about to be revealed in a way they could never have anticipated. As the evidence against Daniel mounted, Detective Mitchell prepared to make her move. She brought Daniel in for another round of questioning, this time with a different approach. She laid out all the evidence they had gathered, the phone records, the witness testimonies, and the forensic findings. Daniel, cornered and overwhelmed, began to crack under the pressure. Mitchell pressed harder, suggesting that if Daniel came clean, he might receive a more lenient sentence. Daniel, unable to handle the weight of his guilt and the relentless questioning, finally broke down. He confessed to killing Jennifer, describing his obsession, the confrontation, and the moment he lost control. In his confession, Daniel also implicated Linda, revealing her role in covering up the crime. He described how she had helped him clean up, dispose of evidence, and craft an alibi. Mitchell, sensing the opportunity to get the full story, had Linda brought in for questioning as well. Confronted with Daniel's confession, Linda initially denied any involvement, but as Mitchell detailed the evidence in Daniel's account, Linda realized there was no way out. Her carefully constructed lies had finally unraveled. She admitted to helping Daniel, explaining that she had done it out of a misguided sense of loyalty and fear of losing everything they had built. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner captivated Pine Hill and the surrounding region. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers eager to see the conclusion of the tragic tale. Daniel was charged with first-degree murder, and Linda was charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. Both pleaded guilty to their respective charges. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda, despite her role in the cover-up, received a lighter sentence due to her cooperation with the investigation and her previously clean record. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10. Mark Johnson, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, found some solace in the justice served, but he continued to mourn the loss of his beloved wife Jennifer, whose life was tragically cut short by a deadly infatuation that spun out of control.
At the heart of this harrowing tale, three souls found themselves irrevocably entwined: the captivating entrepreneur, Oliver Holbrook, the dedicated educator, Taylor Tanner, and the enigmatic new arrival, Claire Reeves. Their paths converged in a whirlwind of longing, envy, and duplicity, ultimately resulting in a tragic demise for two and an irrevocable transformation for the surviving individual. Oliver Holbrook, a native of Millbrook, was the sole offspring of Robert and Elizabeth Holbrook. From his formative years, it was evident that Oliver was bound for greatness. His father, a distinguished local lawyer, imbued him with a robust work ethic and unyielding ambition. His mother, a former pageant winner turned socialite, imparted the nuances of charm and social finesse. Throughout his adolescence, Oliver shone in both scholastic and athletic pursuits. He held the position of captain for the high school football team, presided over the student council, and graduated as the class valedictorian. Post-graduation, Oliver pursued business and economics at an Ivy League institution. Nevertheless, there existed a concealed aspect to Oliver Holbrook, one that remained largely unseen. Beneath his affable demeanor and disarming charm resided a shrewd intellect and an unquenchable thirst for dominance. He was a consummate manipulator, adept at discerning vulnerabilities and capitalizing on them for personal advantage in both professional and private contexts. Oliver perceived relationships as transactions, continually seeking personal benefits. Despite his accomplishments, Oliver remained perpetually discontented. He yearned for incessant affirmation and recognition, a requirement that surfaced in a series of amorous pursuits. He garnered a reputation as a charmer, leaving a succession of heartache in his trail. As he neared his mid-30s, Oliver started to sense the societal expectation to stabilize his life, at least superficially. He recognized that a spouse would bolster his persona as a reputable businessman and community leader. With this perspective, Oliver initiated relationships with both Taylor Tanner and Claire Reeves. In Taylor, he discerned the quintessential prospect for the position of Mrs. Holbrook, appealing, popular, and hailing from a respectable lineage. Conversely, Claire embodied adventure and fervor, a clandestine indulgence he had no plans to relinquish. Unbeknownst to Oliver, his meticulously orchestrated existence was on the brink of disintegration, triggered by the very women he presumed he could dominate. Taylor Tanner personified the quintessential neighbor's daughter. A lifelong resident of Millbrook, she occupied the middle child position in a family of 5. Her parents, Michael and Linda Tanner, were esteemed community members. Her father served as the town's cherished general practitioner, while her mother dedicated years of service to the local animal shelter. Taylor's upbringing was characterized by affection and constancy. The Tanner residence was perpetually abuzz with activity, resonating with mirth and the enticing scent of her mother's culinary creations. This nurturing milieu molded Taylor into a benevolent and understanding young woman, ever prepared to extend assistance or a sympathetic ear to those in distress. Upon completing her degree, Taylor secured a position teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary School. It was at a local charity event organized to raise funds for the school's new library that Taylor first met Oliver Holbrook. She was immediately drawn to his charisma and confident demeanor. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Oliver wooed Taylor with grand gestures, surprise weekend getaways, lavish gifts, and romantic dinners at upscale restaurants. For Taylor, who had always led a relatively simple life, the attention was intoxicating. She fell deeply in love, believing she had found her soulmate. Claire Reeves arrived in Millbrook like a gust of wind, stirring up the quiet town with her mysterious past and alluring presence. Unlike Taylor and Oliver, Claire was an outsider. Having grown up in a series of foster homes across the state of New York, her childhood was marked by instability and loneliness. These experiences shaped her into a complex and often unpredictable adult. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, Claire was placed in the foster care system at the age of 3. Over the next 15 years, she bounced from one home to another, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. This transient lifestyle left Claire with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a desperate need for love and acceptance. Despite the challenges of her upbringing, Claire was fiercely intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, using her studies as an escape from the chaos of her personal life. Her academic success eventually earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York City, where she studied psychology. After graduation, Claire worked as a marketing executive in Manhattan for several years. She was successful in her career, but her personal life was a series of short-lived, tumultuous relationships. Each failed romance left her feeling more empty and desperate for connection. It was in the wake of a particularly painful breakup that Claire decided to leave the city behind and start fresh. She had inherited a modest sum of money from a former foster mother who had shown her particular kindness, and she used this windfall to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Millbrook. Claire was drawn to the town's picturesque charm and the promise of a simpler life. Upon her arrival in Millbrook, Claire quickly caught the attention of the locals. Her striking looks and big city sophistication made her stand out in the small town. She found work as a consultant for local businesses, using her marketing expertise to help them expand their reach. It was at one of these consulting jobs that Claire first encountered Oliver Holbrook. The attraction between them was immediate and electric. In Oliver, Claire saw everything she had ever wanted: success, stability, and the promise of love. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a happy ending. As Claire and Oliver began their clandestine affair, she convinced herself that she had finally found her place in the world. She threw herself into the relationship with the desperation of someone who had never known true belonging. However, Claire's fragile sense of security would soon be shattered by the revelation of Oliver's engagement to Taylor. This betrayal would trigger all of Claire's deepest fears and insecurities, setting in motion a tragic chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the town of Millbrook. A summer turned to fall in Millbrook, and the lives of Oliver, Taylor, and Claire became increasingly entangled in a complex web of desire, deceit, and jealousy. Oliver, ever the skilled manipulator, carefully navigated his relationships with both women, feeding each of them just enough attention and affection to keep them invested. With Taylor, Oliver played the role of the devoted fiancé. He attended local events by her side, charmed her family at Sunday dinners, and made grand plans for their future together. Taylor basked in the glow of their engagement, excitedly sharing details of their upcoming wedding with anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Oliver's encounters with Claire took place in the shadows. They met in out-of-the-way restaurants in neighboring towns or at Claire's secluded cottage. During these stolen moments, Oliver showered Claire with the passion and intensity that he carefully held back from Taylor. He fed Claire's hopes with vague promises of a future together, always with the caveat that he needed time to handle things with Taylor. As the weeks passed, tension began to build between Taylor and Claire, even though Taylor remained unaware of the true nature of Claire's relationship with Oliver. The two women often found themselves at the same local events, with Claire's presence invariably drawing Oliver's attention away from his fiancée. Taylor, trusting and naive, initially tried to befriend Claire, sensing the newcomer's loneliness. She invited Claire to girls' nights out and community functions, unwittingly providing more opportunities for Oliver and Claire to cross paths. Claire, consumed by her feelings for Oliver and racked with guilt over betraying Taylor's friendly overtures, became increasingly volatile. Her behavior swung between overly solicitous towards Taylor and barely concealed hostility. These mood swings did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, who began to speculate about the source of Claire's apparent instability. Oliver observed the growing friction between the two women with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. While he worried about his carefully constructed double life unraveling, he also reveled in the knowledge that two beautiful women were competing for his affections. As autumn progressed and the date of Oliver and Taylor's wedding drew nearer, the situation became increasingly untenable. Claire's demands for Oliver to leave Taylor grew more frequent and desperate, while Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Little did any of them know that their actions over the next few months would shatter the peaceful facade of Millbrook and change their lives forever. On a crisp October morning, the day of Oliver and Taylor's wedding arrived. The entire town of Millbrook seemed to be in attendance, filling the picturesque white church to capacity. Taylor, radiant in a classic white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face beaming with joy and love. Oliver stood at the altar, outwardly the picture of a happy groom. But those who knew him well might have noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that belied his calm exterior. As he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish Taylor for all eternity, his thoughts couldn't help but stray to Claire. Unbeknownst to the happy couple and their guests, Claire was outside the church, hidden from view but close enough to hear the ceremony. Each word of love and devotion that echoed from within the building was like a dagger to her heart. As the church bells rang out, signaling the completion of the ceremony, Claire felt something inside her snap. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with the entire town celebrating the union of two of its most beloved residents. Taylor danced and laughed, surrounded by friends and family, while Oliver played his role to perfection, ever the charming and attentive new husband. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, Oliver found his mask slipping more than once. Taylor caught him staring off into the distance, a troubled expression on his face. When she asked what was wrong, he brushed off her concerns with a quick smile and a kiss. As the newlyweds drove off to their honeymoon, tin cans rattling behind their car and well-wishes ringing in their ears, neither of them could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. For in the shadows, Claire Reeves was already plotting her revenge. In the weeks following Oliver and Taylor's wedding, Claire Reeves spiraled into a pit of despair and obsession. The life she had imagined for herself, a future with Oliver, had been snatched away, leaving her feeling betrayed and discarded. Her fragile psyche, already damaged by years of abandonment and instability, began to fracture under the weight of her grief and anger. At first, Claire tried to move on. She threw herself into her work, taking on more consulting projects than ever before. She attempted to socialize, accepting invitations to local gatherings and community events. But everywhere she went, she was confronted with reminders of Oliver and Taylor's happiness. The newlyweds were the talk of the town, their smiling faces seeming to mock Claire at every turn. As her pain deepened, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up late to meetings or missing them entirely. Her appearance, once impeccable, grew disheveled. Concerned neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets late at night, muttering to herself. But it was Claire's growing obsession with Taylor that truly marked her descent into madness. She began stalking the young teacher, following her to and from work, watching her house from a distance. Claire convinced herself that if she could just understand Taylor, figure out what made her so special in Oliver's eyes, she could win him back. Claire's cottage became a shrine to her obsession. Walls were covered with photos of Taylor, cut from local newspapers and printouts from social media. She created elaborate timelines and diagrams, trying to piece together every detail of Taylor's life and her relationship with Oliver. As weeks turned into months, Claire's fantasies grew darker. She began to imagine scenarios where Taylor was out of the picture, leaving the path clear for her to reclaim Oliver's affections. At first, these were harmless daydreams, Taylor moving away or realizing she didn't love Oliver after all. But gradually, Claire's thoughts turned to murder. She spent hours researching different methods, weighing the pros and cons of each with a detached, almost clinical precision. She created multiple plans, each more elaborate than the last, always careful to cover her tracks and establish alibis. Throughout this time, Claire maintained sporadic contact with Oliver. Their encounters were brief and increasingly tense, with Claire alternating between desperate pleas for him to leave Taylor and bitter accusations of betrayal. Oliver, growing uncomfortable with Claire's intensity, began to distance himself, unaware of the dangerous turn her obsession had taken. As winter settled over Millbrook, Claire's plans began to crystallize. She had chosen her method, a staged hit-and-run accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. In her deluded mind, she had convinced herself that eliminating Taylor was not just for her own benefit, but for Oliver's as well. She truly believed that he was trapped in an unhappy marriage and that she would be liberating him. The night before she planned to carry out her deadly scheme, Claire stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the wild-eyed woman staring back at her. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. But then she remembered the sound of wedding bells, the sight of Oliver kissing his bride, and her resolve hardened once more. On a foggy Wednesday morning in February, Taylor Tanner Holbrook left her house for her daily jog, just as she had done countless times before. The streets were quiet, most of Millbrook's residents still tucked away in their warm beds. Taylor, with her bright yellow running jacket and bouncing ponytail, was a spot of color in the gray landscape. Unbeknownst to Taylor, Claire Reeves was waiting. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation as she sat in a stolen car at the end of a secluded stretch of road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As Taylor's form appeared through the mist, Claire took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The next few moments passed in a blur of screeching tires, a muffled scream, and the sickening thud of impact. Claire, operating on autopilot, quickly drove away from the scene, leaving Taylor's crumpled body on the side of the road. It was a jogger who found Taylor an hour later. By then, it was too late. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, Taylor was pronounced dead at the scene. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, leaving the town reeling in shock and grief. In the immediate aftermath, Claire's plans seemed to work perfectly. The police initially treated the incident as a tragic hit-and-run accident. Claire had meticulously planned her alibi, making sure she was seen at a 24-hour diner in a neighboring town both before and after the time of Taylor's death. Oliver, upon hearing the news of his wife's death, put on a convincing display of grief. He wept openly at the funeral, leaning on friends and family for support. To all outward appearances, he was a devastated widower struggling to come to terms with his loss. But as the initial shock wore off and the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in the facade. Detective Lisa Monteague, assigned to the case, sensed that there was more to Taylor's death than a simple accident. As she dug deeper, she began to uncover the tangled web of relationships that had led to this tragic event. Meanwhile, Claire watched from the sidelines, a mix of guilt and triumph warring within her. She had achieved her goal. Taylor was gone. Now, surely Oliver would be hers. But as the days passed and Oliver remained distant, doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she made a terrible mistake? In the weeks following Taylor's death, Millbrook was shrouded in a pall of grief and suspicion. The once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, wondering if a killer walked among them. Detective Monteigue's investigation sent ripples through the community as she interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances of Taylor. Oliver Holbrook maintained his role as the grieving widower, making tearful appearances on local news channels and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of Taylor's killer. He threw himself into charity work in Taylor's name, establishing a foundation to support local education initiatives. Claire, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her, manifesting in bouts of insomnia and panic attacks. She obsessively followed the news of the investigation, terrified that each day would bring a knock on her door from the police. As Detective Monteague delved deeper into Taylor's life, she began to uncover inconsistencies in Oliver's story. Several witnesses reported seeing him arguing with Taylor in the weeks leading up to her death. Financial records showed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. The detective's attention also turned to Claire. Her erratic behavior in the months prior to Taylor's death had not gone unnoticed, and her sudden calming in the aftermath raised suspicions. When questioned, Claire's alibi seemed airtight, but Detective Monteague sensed she was hiding something. As winter gave way to spring, Claire's initial elation at having eliminated her rival began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Despite her expectations, Oliver had not rushed into her arms in the wake of Taylor's death. In fact, he had become increasingly distant, avoiding her calls and making excuses to cancel their planned meetings. Frustrated and confused, Claire decided to confront Oliver at his office after hours. As she approached the building, she noticed a light on in his window. Peering inside, she saw Oliver in an intimate embrace with a woman she did not recognize. The sight sent Claire reeling, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on her. She had murdered an innocent woman, destroyed countless lives, all for a man who had never truly cared for her. Overwhelmed by guilt and anger, Claire stormed into Oliver's office, catching him and the unknown woman by surprise. What followed was a heated confrontation, with Claire unleashing years of pent-up pain and rage. She accused Oliver of using her, of manipulating her feelings to get rid of Taylor. Oliver, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking, didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he coldly informed Claire that she had served her purpose and was no longer needed. He threatened to expose her role in Taylor's death if she didn't disappear from his life for good. Shattered and desperate, Claire fled the office, her mind racing. She now realized the true extent of Oliver's manipulation and her own terrible mistake. As she drove home in a daze, Claire was unaware that her confrontation with Oliver had been witnessed by someone else, someone who would soon set in motion the final act of this tragic play. The woman Claire had seen with Oliver was Olivia Chen, a brilliant young lawyer who had recently joined Oliver's firm. Olivia had been drawn into an affair with Oliver, seduced by his charm and the promise of career advancement. However, unlike Claire, Olivia was not blind to Oliver's true nature. On the night of Claire's confrontation with Oliver, Olivia had hidden herself in an adjoining room, overhearing every word of their heated exchange. The revelation of Oliver's involvement in his wife's death left her cold with horror and disgust. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She knew she should go to the police with what she had learned, but fear of professional repercussions and her own complicity in the affair held her back. As she observed Oliver continuing to play the role of the grieving widower, her revulsion grew. Determined to uncover the full truth, Olivia began her own covert investigation. She meticulously combed through Oliver's files and emails, slowly piecing together the extent of his deceit. What she discovered went far beyond Taylor's murder, revealing a pattern of fraud and manipulation that spanned years. With each new revelation, Olivia's resolve strengthened. She knew what she had to do. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, Olivia confronted Oliver in his office late one evening. She laid out everything she had discovered, from his manipulation of Claire to his fraudulent business practices. Oliver, realizing the precariousness of his situation, attempted to charm and threaten Olivia into silence. But Olivia was prepared. She had secretly recorded their entire conversation, capturing Oliver's implicit admission of guilt. As she turned to leave, intending to take her evidence to the police, Oliver snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he attacked Olivia, attempting to wrestle the recording device from her hands. What Oliver didn't know was that Olivia, haunted by the fate of Taylor Tanner Holbrook, had come prepared. In the struggle, she managed to reach into her purse and pull out a small pistol. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty office building. Oliver Holbrook, the man who had manipulated so many, who had indirectly caused the death of his wife and the ruin of Claire Reeves, crumpled to the floor. Olivia stood over him, the smoking gun still in her hand, a mix of shock and grim satisfaction on her face. As sirens wailed in the distance, Olivia calmly sat down to wait for the police. She knew that her actions would have consequences, but she also knew that the truth would finally come to light. Oliver Holbrook's reign of deception was over. The shot that killed Oliver Holbrook reverberated through Millbrook, setting off a chain reaction that would finally bring the full story of Taylor's death to light. As Olivia Chen was taken into custody, the true extent of Oliver's manipulations began to unravel. In the wake of Oliver Holbrook's death, the investigation into Taylor's murder took on new urgency. Detective Montague, armed with the evidence Olivia had gathered, began to piece together the full picture of events that had transpired over the past year. Claire Reeves, racked with guilt and fear, finally broke down under questioning. She confessed to her role in Taylor's death, providing a detailed account of her actions and motivations. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Oliver's manipulation and the extent to which he had orchestrated the events leading to his wife's murder. Claire, having confessed to Taylor's murder, was sentenced to life in prison. Olivia's case was more complex. She was convicted of manslaughter but received a reduced sentence due to the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death. The tragic tale of Oliver Holbrook, Taylor Tanner, Claire Reeves, and Olivia Chen would be remembered for years to come, a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most picturesque surfaces. On a quiet autumn morning, the body of Melissa Porter, a beloved local kindergarten teacher, was found lifeless in her car on a deserted road near the outskirts of town. She had disappeared 2 days earlier, leaving her husband, James Porter, and the entire community in a state of shock and worry. James, an accountant with a gentle demeanor, was the first to alert the authorities about his missing wife. His anxiety was palpable in the quivering of his voice as he spoke to the police. The discovery of Melissa's body confirmed his worst fears, turning them into a terrifying reality. As the investigation unfolded, 2 other men, Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, became subjects of interest. Both men had been romantically involved with Melissa and held deep, complicated feelings for her. Detective Sarah Davis, a skilled investigator with a keen intellect and unwavering commitment to justice, was put in charge of the case. As she probed deeper into Melissa's life and her relationships with James, Michael, and Joe, it became increasingly evident that this seemingly simple case concealed a maze of secrets and betrayals. Melissa Porter's tragic end was not merely a story of untimely death, but a complex web of love, deception, and vengeance. It was on a brisk morning when Officer Tom Harris was notified of an abandoned vehicle near Oakwood. As he approached the scene, the sight of Melissa's car gave him an eerie feeling. The car was parked carelessly with one wheel on the gravel and the other on the grass. The windows were misty, and a faint, unpleasant odor filled the air. Harris looked through the driver's window and was startled to see Melissa's lifeless body slumped over the steering wheel. Her skin was pale, and a thin trail of dried blood was visible on her temple. The cause of death was not immediately clear, but the scene hinted at foul play. The news of Melissa's discovery sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Oakwood. She had been missing for 2 days, and her loved ones had been clinging to the hope that she would be found safe and sound. However, their hopes were cruelly shattered. James Porter was devastated, his grief intensified by the public attention he was now subjected to. He had reported his wife's disappearance and was now at the center of a murder investigation. Detective Sarah Davis arrived at the scene with a solemn expression. She carefully examined the car and its surroundings, observing that there were no signs of struggle or defensive wounds on Melissa's body. This led her to suspect that Melissa might have been rendered unconscious or incapacitated prior to her death. A preliminary inspection revealed traces of a powder-like substance on the passenger seat, which was later identified as a powerful sedative. Davis instructed her team to search the area for potential witnesses and arranged for the car to be transported to the forensic lab for a comprehensive examination. The investigation was only starting, but the pressure to uncover the truth was mounting. The community demanded justice for Melissa, and the police were resolved to deliver it. The Oakwood Police Department quickly mobilized to investigate Melissa Porter's death. Detective Davis spearheaded the effort, her no-nonsense attitude setting the tone for the team. The first order of business was to question James Porter, whose proximity to the victim made him an initial person of interest. James was brought in for questioning at the station. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Detective Davis began with routine questions about his relationship with Melissa, their recent activities, and his whereabouts during the time she was missing. James explained that he and Melissa had been married for 5 years, a seemingly happy couple in the eyes of the community. He recounted the night Melissa disappeared. She had left the house around 7 p.m., claiming she needed to run some errands. When she didn't return, he grew worried and called the police the next morning. Davis noted his demeanor, searching for signs of deception. James provided an alibi, stating he was home watching TV that night. He offered to let the police verify his story with their home security system's footage. Davis made a mental note to follow up on this lead. As the interview progressed, another name surfaced: Michael Reynolds. According to James, Michael was a close friend of Melissa's, someone she had known for years. James admitted he had always felt a bit uneasy about their relationship, but had no concrete reason to suspect anything amiss. Detective Davis decided to pay Michael a visit. Michael Reynolds, a tall man in his early 30s with an air of easy confidence, welcomed the detectives into his home. He seemed genuinely distraught upon hearing of Melissa's death, insisting they had been just friends. However, his nervous fidgeting suggested there might be more to the story. The investigation widened to include Joe Clark, a local artist who had been seen with Melissa on numerous occasions. Joe, in his mid-40s, was known for his brooding temperament and reclusive lifestyle. He was less forthcoming than Michael, evading direct questions and offering vague, cryptic responses. Detective Davis sensed that both Michael and Joe were hiding something. The threads of Melissa's life began to unravel, revealing a woman who was far more complex and enigmatic than anyone had realized. With each interview, the investigation grew more convoluted and the stakes became higher. The truth about Melissa's death was buried beneath layers of secrets, and it was up to Davis to dig them out. Melissa Porter was born and raised in Oakwood, a town she loved and never wanted to leave. She was known for her warm smile and her ability to connect with people, traits that made her an excellent kindergarten teacher. Her marriage to James was seen as a match made in heaven, though those closest to her knew there was more beneath the surface. Melissa met James at a charity event 5 years ago. James, an accountant with a stable job and a kind heart, seemed like the perfect partner. They married within a year, and for a while their life together appeared idyllic. But over time, Melissa began to feel restless. The routine of married life left her yearning for something more. Enter Michael Reynolds. Michael and Melissa had been friends since high school. Their bond had always been strong, and there were times when their friendship seemed to border on something deeper. Michael, a charming and successful entrepreneur, offered Melissa the excitement and passion she felt was missing from her marriage. Their relationship, while initially platonic, soon evolved into a secret affair. Melissa found herself torn between the security James provided and the thrill she experienced with Michael. Her feelings for Michael were intense, but also brought complications and guilt. Then there was Joe Clark. Joe was a local artist known for his moody paintings and reclusive nature. Melissa met Joe at an art exhibition a year before her death. Joe was different from both James and Michael. He was mysterious and brooding, qualities that fascinated Melissa. Their connection was immediate, and it wasn't long before Melissa found herself involved with Joe as well. Melissa's relationships with Michael and Joe were known only to a few close friends, and she took great pains to keep them hidden from James. However, managing these affairs became increasingly difficult, and Melissa's life grew more complicated. She loved each of these men in different ways, and each offered her something unique. But she also knew that this web of love and deceit could not last forever. As Detective Davis delved deeper into Melissa's background, she discovered a woman who was passionate and vibrant, but also deeply conflicted. Melissa's need for connection and excitement had led her down a dangerous path, one that ultimately ended in her untimely death. With Melissa's body discovered and her secret life beginning to surface, suspicion naturally fell on James Porter. Detective Davis scrutinized his alibi, seeking any inconsistencies that might indicate his involvement in his wife's death. James's alibi rested on his claim that he was at home the night Melissa disappeared, watching TV and later falling asleep on the couch. The home security footage confirmed that James had not left the house during the critical hours. However, Davis was not entirely convinced. She knew that alibis could be fabricated or manipulated. The state of the Porters' marriage became a focal point of the investigation. Friends and neighbors painted a picture of a couple that appeared happy but had their share of issues. Financial records showed that the Porters were struggling with debt, a potential motive for James to want his wife out of the picture. Life insurance policies on Melissa further added to the suspicion, though the amounts were not exorbitant. James's demeanor during questioning was another point of concern. While his grief seemed genuine, there were moments when his responses were too measured, too controlled. Davis wondered if he was hiding something or simply trying to protect himself from being wrongfully accused. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages exchanged between James and Melissa in the days leading up to her disappearance. The messages revealed growing tension between them, with Melissa expressing dissatisfaction and James responding with frustration. The arguments, though not overtly violent, indicated a marriage under significant strain. James's interactions with Michael and Joe also raised red flags. Both men admitted to having confrontations with James, who had become increasingly suspicious of their relationships with Melissa. James denied any knowledge of Melissa's affairs, but his anger towards the men was palpable. As the investigation progressed, James Porter remained a prime suspect. His potential motives, financial gain, marital discord, and jealousy, provided enough cause for Detective Davis to keep a close watch on him. However, without concrete evidence linking him directly to the crime, the case against him remained circumstantial. Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, the two men who had shared intimate relationships with Melissa, were next on Detective Davis's list. Each had their own reasons for wanting Melissa in their lives and potentially reasons for wanting her gone. Michael Reynolds, with his charismatic demeanor and successful career, seemed an unlikely suspect at first glance. He had been Melissa's confidant for years, their bond evolving into a romantic relationship that brought both joy and complications. Michael's feelings for Melissa were genuine, but his frustration with her indecision and the secrecy of their affair had caused tension. During questioning, Michael admitted to feeling hurt and betrayed when he discovered Melissa's involvement with Joe. But he vehemently denied having anything to do with her death. Joe Clark was a different story. Known for his brooding personality and artistic temperament, Joe had always been somewhat of an enigma. His relationship with Melissa was intense and passionate, but also fraught with jealousy and possessiveness. Joe's art often reflected his tumultuous emotions, and his interactions with Melissa had been no exception. During his interview, Joe was evasive, his answers tinged with bitterness. He expressed deep sorrow over Melissa's death, but also a lingering resentment towards her for being unable to fully commit to him. Davis noted the contrasts between Michael and Joe, one a polished, successful businessman, the other a moody, introspective artist. Both had motives driven by love and jealousy, and both had been deeply affected by Melissa's actions. The detective also discovered that Michael and Joe had confronted each other on several occasions, their arguments escalating as Melissa's relationships with them became more entangled. The investigation into Michael and Joe's backgrounds revealed more layers to Melissa's story. Each man had been drawn to Melissa's vivacious personality and warmth, but both had also experienced the darker sides of their relationships with her. The complexity of these relationships suggested that Melissa's death was not a straightforward case of jealousy or revenge, but rather a culmination of many conflicting emotions and desires. As Detective Davis continued to unravel the intricacies of Melissa's life and relationships, she realized that the truth was buried deep within a web of passion, betrayal, and hidden motives. The challenge was to untangle these threads and find the one that would lead to Melissa's killer. As Detective Davis dug deeper into the lives of Melissa, James, Michael, and Joe, she began to uncover a series of startling revelations and secrets that painted a clearer picture of Melissa's complex world. The first major revelation came from Melissa's close friend, Laura Mitchell. Laura revealed that Melissa had been confiding in her for months about the struggles in her marriage and the turmoil caused by her relationships with Michael and Joe. Melissa had been feeling increasingly trapped and overwhelmed by the dual pressures of maintaining her marriage and managing her affairs. Laura also mentioned that Melissa had expressed fears about someone stalking her, though she never specified who. This new information prompted Davis to re-examine the evidence with fresh eyes. The possibility of a third-party involvement, someone who knew about Melissa's affairs and had a vested interest in her demise, became a compelling angle. Davis ordered a deeper investigation into Melissa's communications and social media, looking for any signs of threats or suspicious activity. The forensic analysis of Melissa's car provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. Traces of the sedative found in the passenger seat matched a prescription registered to Joe Clark. When confronted with this evidence, Joe's calm facade began to crack. He admitted to having the sedative, but claimed he had no intention of harming Melissa. According to Joe, Melissa had asked him for the sedative to help her sleep, a claim that was difficult to verify. Further complicating the investigation was a discovery in Michael's financial records. Large sums of money had been transferred between Michael's accounts and an unknown third party over the past few months. Michael explained that these were business transactions, but the lack of clear documentation raised suspicion. Davis wondered if Michael might have been involved in some form of blackmail or had hired someone to intimidate Melissa. The pressure on all three men intensified as Davis continued to piece together Melissa's last days. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues revealed that Melissa had been planning to leave Oakwood, possibly to escape the tangled relationships she had found herself in. She had been seen packing boxes into her car and had mentioned to a colleague that she needed a fresh start. Then came the biggest revelation of all, a hidden journal found in Melissa's belongings. The journal contained detailed accounts of her relationships with James, Michael, and Joe, as well as her fears and plans for the future. Melissa wrote about feeling suffocated by James's controlling nature, exhilarated by her affair with Michael, and deeply conflicted about her intense connection with Joe. She also mentioned receiving anonymous threats, which she suspected were from someone who knew about her affairs. The journal painted a picture of a woman caught in a web of her own making, desperate to break free but unsure how. It provided Detective Davis with critical insights into Melissa's state of mind and the potential motives of those around her. With this new evidence, Davis felt she was finally closing in on the truth. Just as Detective Davis thought she was getting closer to solving the case, a surprising twist emerged that shifted the focus of the investigation. A new piece of evidence surfaced, a security camera recording from a nearby convenience store that showed Melissa in the company of a man who was neither James, Michael, nor Joe on the night she disappeared. The man in the footage was identified as Daniel Harper, a former colleague of Melissa's from a previous job in a neighboring town. Harper had a checkered past, including a history of violent behavior and a restraining order filed against him by a former girlfriend. The discovery of his involvement with Melissa added a new layer of complexity to the case. Davis brought Harper in for questioning. Harper, a wiry man with a nervous energy, initially denied having seen Melissa recently. However, when confronted with the video evidence, he changed his story. He admitted to meeting Melissa that night, but claimed they had only talked. According to Harper, Melissa had reached out to him because she felt threatened and needed someone to confide in. She had asked Harper to meet her away from Oakwood to avoid being seen by anyone who might know her. Harper's account seemed plausible, but Davis was wary. Harper had a motive: his unrequited feelings for Melissa and his jealousy over her relationships with other men. His past behavior suggested he could be capable of violence, especially if he felt rejected or betrayed. Davis decided to dig deeper into Harper's background and his interactions with Melissa. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of Harper's car revealed traces of the same sedative found in Melissa's vehicle. This new evidence linked Harper directly to the scene of the crime, making him a prime suspect. Harper's story began to unravel under the weight of mounting evidence. He confessed that he had given Melissa the sedative but insisted it was for her own protection, claiming she had asked for it to calm her nerves. Detective Davis knew that Harper's involvement complicated the narrative, but she also suspected there was more to the story. Harper's account of events didn't entirely align with the evidence. Davis hypothesized that Harper might have been manipulated by someone else, possibly Michael or Joe, to carry out the crime. The idea of a larger conspiracy began to take shape as Davis continued to press Harper for details. He revealed a startling detail. He had been receiving anonymous payments over the past few months, just like Michael. Harper claimed he didn't know who was behind the payments, but admitted they were meant to ensure his silence about his meetings with Melissa. This revelation pointed to a coordinated effort to keep Melissa's secrets hidden. Davis realized that the investigation had taken a dark turn, one that involved not just a crime of passion, but a calculated plan to silence Melissa permanently. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, and Davis was determined to uncover the mastermind behind the plot. The investigation took a sinister turn as Detective Davis unraveled the web of deception surrounding Melissa's death. The revelation of anonymous payments and Harper's involvement hinted at a larger, more nefarious plot. Davis now had to consider the possibility that Melissa's death was not just a crime of passion, but a premeditated murder orchestrated by someone with a hidden agenda. Davis's team focused on tracing the source of the payments. Financial records showed a series of transactions funneled through a shell company, eventually leading to an offshore account. The intricate financial trail suggested a high level of planning and resourcefulness, characteristics not typically associated with crimes of passion. This new lead pointed towards someone with significant financial acumen and the means to cover their tracks, potentially Michael Reynolds, given his business background. Davis revisited Michael, armed with the new evidence. Under intense questioning, Michael's confident facade began to crack. He admitted to transferring money to Harper, but insisted it was to help Melissa, not harm her. He claimed Melissa had confided in him about her fears and asked him to arrange for protection. But he had no idea Harper would misuse the funds. Davis was not convinced by Michael's explanation. She suspected that Michael, feeling cornered by Melissa's indecision and the threat of their affair being exposed, had orchestrated a plan to remove her from the equation. However, Michael alone could not have executed such a complex scheme. The involvement of Joe Clark with his volatile emotions and connection to Melissa seemed likely. Confronting Joe, Davis presented the evidence of the sedative and the financial transactions. Joe, already unstable, broke down under the pressure. He confessed to being manipulated by Michael, who had convinced him that Melissa was planning to leave both of them and expose their affairs. In a desperate bid to prevent this, Joe agreed to Michael's plan to sedate Melissa and make her disappear. The dark truth emerged. Michael had orchestrated the entire plot, using Joe and Harper as pawns to carry out his plan. Michael's motive was not just jealousy, but a calculated decision to eliminate Melissa and protect his reputation and business interests. Joe, driven by his emotional turmoil, had been an unwitting accomplice. Harper, lured by money, had played his part without fully understanding the consequences. Davis's investigation had uncovered a chilling conspiracy that highlighted the lengths people would go to protect their secrets and desires. The case was far more complex and darker than anyone had initially imagined, revealing the depths of human deceit and treachery. With the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, Detective Davis moved swiftly to secure arrest warrants for Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark. The evidence against them was overwhelming: financial transactions, confessions, and the forensic link between the sedative and Joe. Davis coordinated with her team to ensure that the arrests were conducted smoothly and without incident. Joe Clark was the first to be apprehended. He was found at his studio, surrounded by his hauntingly dark paintings. The arresting officers found him in a state of disarray, his guilt and regret evident. Joe offered no resistance, murmuring apologies and asking about Melissa's final moments. His remorse was genuine, but it could not absolve him of his role in the crime. Michael Reynolds proved more challenging. He had anticipated the arrest and attempted to flee. However, a coordinated effort by the Oakwood Police Department ensured he was apprehended at a private airstrip, trying to board a chartered plane. His arrest was marked by defiance and indignation, maintaining his innocence and accusing the police of fabricating evidence. With both suspects in custody, the prosecution began to build a robust case. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Oakwood's history, drawing intense media attention. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, journalists, and those who had known Melissa. The prosecution presented a compelling narrative of manipulation, betrayal, and murder, while the defense tried to paint Michael as a victim of circumstance and Joe as a man driven to desperation. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the extensive evidence and emotional testimonies. Ultimately, both Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and second-degree murder. Michael received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Joe, whose genuine remorse and cooperation were considered, was given a reduced sentence of 25 years. Daniel Harper, whose role was more peripheral, was charged with accessory to murder and received a lesser sentence of 10 years. His involvement, though significant, was viewed as being coerced by the primary conspirators. In the end, Oakwood returned to its peaceful existence, but the memory of Melissa Porter and the lessons learned from her case would never be forgotten. Her story remained a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring quest for truth and justice. Today, we plunge into a haunting narrative of deception and murder that unfolded in Fayetteville, Arkansas, back in April 2015. The story revolves around Johnny Ray Baxter, a thriving real estate agent whose life was savagely ended by someone he trusted deeply. A resident of Fayetteville, Arkansas, Johnny Ray Baxter was a 45-year-old man. He was an esteemed real estate agent, employed by a local firm named Ozark Realty. Johnny Ray was known for his wide smile and amiable nature, which made him a favorite among his clients and peers. He held a business administration degree from the University of Arkansas and had spent over 2 decades in the real estate sector. Johnny Ray was married to Darling Baxter, and they appeared to be a content couple. Johnny Ray was Darling's second spouse. He had an 18-year-old stepdaughter, Lily Adams, who was in her inaugural year at the University of Arkansas, pursuing psychology. Johnny Ray appeared to share a cordial bond with Lily, at least in the public eye. Beyond his professional life, Johnny Ray had a passion for sailing. He was the proud owner of a small sailboat, Dreamcatcher, and frequently sailed on Beaver Lake. He relished spending his weekends on the water, soaking in the wind and the waves. His acquaintances at the local marina remembered him fondly as someone who was always ready to help and share a hearty laugh. In the days leading up to his demise, Johnny Ray was engrossed in a significant property transaction. He was striving to finalize a deal for a substantial commercial property in downtown Fayetteville, a deal that held immense significance for his career. Additionally, he was organizing a surprise anniversary getaway for Darling. He had reserved a cabin in the Ozark Mountains and secured tickets for a concert in Little Rock. He had even chosen a special necklace from a local jewelry store, Sissy's Log Cabin, as a present for Darling. Despite his hectic schedule, Johnny Ray always found time to visit the local coffee shop, Our Sagas, every morning. He enjoyed perusing the newspaper and conversing with the baristas. His preferred beverage was a caramel latte. On the 10th of April, 2015, merely 2 days before his tragic end, Johnny Ray was spotted at Our Sagas with a smile on his face, discussing his weekend plans. He appeared to be cheerful and enthusiastic about the future. However, beneath the surface, Johnny Ray's life was not as perfect as it seemed. His wife, Darling, had been behaving anxiously and apprehensively of late. She had observed changes in their daughter, Lily, and harbored suspicions about Johnny Ray's late-night work engagements. Their friends and neighbors had begun to sense the strain in the Baxter household. On a fateful morning around 7:30 a.m. on April 12, 2015, the lifeless body of Johnny Ray Baxter was found. The grim discovery was made by his neighbor, Michael Everly, a 52-year-old retired schoolteacher residing next door to the Baxters. Michael's visit was prompted by a worried call from Darling, Johnny Ray's wife, who had been out of town visiting her sister and hadn't heard from her husband since the previous night. She requested Michael to check on Johnny Ray. Upon arriving at the Baxter residence, Michael found no response to his knocks. Noticing Johnny Ray's car in the driveway, he decided to investigate further. To his surprise, the door was unlocked. As he entered, an eerie silence hung in the air, hinting that something was amiss. Michael called out for Johnny Ray, but the house remained silent. Venturing into the living room and kitchen, he stumbled upon signs of a struggle. Overturned chairs and shattered glass littered the floor. Following the chaotic trail, he reached the master bedroom, where a horrifying sight awaited him. Johnny Ray lay lifeless in a pool of blood, the victim of a brutal hammer attack. The room was in disarray, with blood spattered on the walls and furniture, indicating a desperate struggle for survival. The gruesome discovery left Michael reeling in shock. Trembling, he dialed 911 and described the harrowing scene. The 911 operator attempted to calm him down, urging him to remain on the line until the police arrived. News of Johnny Ray's untimely demise rapidly spread throughout the neighborhood. Maple Street was soon teeming with police cars, and curious onlookers gathered outside, exchanging hushed whispers about the tragic event. Local news stations, such as KSM and K, promptly dispatched reporters to cover the unfolding story, which quickly became Fayetteville's top news. Michael, who had shared years of friendship with Johnny Ray, was left devastated by the brutal turn of events. He later confided in reporters that Johnny Ray was a kind-hearted individual who didn't deserve such a horrific fate. The discovery of Johnny Ray Baxter's body set in motion a complex and heart-rending investigation that would expose hidden secrets and lead to startling revelations about those closest to him. Following Michael Everly's distressing 911 call on April 12, 2015, the police swiftly arrived at the Baxter residence. The initial officers on the scene promptly secured the area, ensuring no one entered or exited the house. Subsequently, Detectives Sarah Mitchell Kinsey and James Carter took charge of the investigation. Detective Kinsey, renowned for her keen attention to detail, had an impressive track record of solving intricate cases despite her relatively young age of 38. Her partner, Detective Carter, was a seasoned investigator at 42, recognized for his methodical approach. Together, they formed an effective team. As they carefully examined the house, they encountered evidence of a struggle. The living room bore the brunt of the chaos, with overturned chairs and broken glass strewn about. The kitchen was equally disheveled, with dishes scattered across the floor. Upon entering the master bedroom, they were confronted with a chilling sight. Johnny Ray Baxter's body lay on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood, the result of a vicious hammer assault. Blood splatters marked the walls and furniture, testifying to the violence of the attack. Detective Mitchell Kinsey identified the hammer as the murder weapon and ordered it to be collected as evidence. The crime scene was chaotic and disturbing. The detectives and forensic team took many photos and collected samples. They used gloves to carefully pick up items, making sure not to contaminate any evidence. Blood samples, fingerprints, and the hammer were all collected and sent to the lab for analysis. Outside, neighbors watched as the police worked. The local news stations, KFSM and KNWA, were there too, reporting on the shocking murder. Reporters spoke to neighbors who described Johnny Ray as a friendly and well-liked man. The media coverage added pressure to solve the case quickly. Detectives Mitchell Kinsey and Carter interviewed Michael Everly, who was still shaken from discovering the body. He described finding the door unlocked and seeing the mess inside the house. His detailed account helped the detectives piece together the events leading up to the murder. By the end of the day, the police had gathered a lot of evidence, but still had many questions. Who could have committed such a brutal act? Why would someone want to kill Johnny Ray? The detectives knew they had a difficult case ahead of them, but they were determined to find the answers. The first suspect in Johnny Ray Baxter's murder was his wife, Darling Baxter. Darling was 34 years old and worked as an accountant for a local firm called Razorback Accounting. She was intelligent, meticulous, and hardworking. Darling had a tough past. She became a mother at 16 and worked as a stripper to support herself and her daughter Lily. Despite these challenges, she built a successful career and was known for her strong-willed nature. Darling had recently noticed changes in her daughter Lily's behavior and grew suspicious of Johnny Ray's late-night work meetings. Friends and neighbors described Darling as increasingly stressed and on edge in the weeks before the murder. Some said they heard arguments between her and Johnny Ray. Detectives Sarah Mitchell Kinsey and James Carter brought Darling in for questioning on April 13, 2015. Darling appeared calm, but was clearly distressed. She maintained that she had been out of town visiting her sister Nancy in Little Rock. She provided photos and text messages to support her alibi, but the detectives still had doubts. During the interrogation, Darling spoke about her relationship with Johnny Ray. She admitted they had been arguing more lately, mainly about his work and the amount of time he spent away from home. She denied any involvement in his death, insisting she loved her husband despite their problems. The detectives asked Darling about the night of the murder. She explained that she had left for Little Rock on the afternoon of April 11th and stayed with Nancy until the morning of April 12th. Nancy confirmed this story when the detectives called her. However, they couldn't ignore the tension in Darling's voice when she spoke about Johnny Ray and the changes she noticed in Lily. The police also searched Darling's car and belongings for any evidence. They found nothing directly linking her to the murder, but they did find a diary in which Darling had written about her frustrations and suspicions. These entries painted a picture of a woman under immense stress and emotional turmoil. Despite her alibi, Darling remained a prime suspect. The detectives continued to look into her past, interviewing friends, family, and co-workers. They hoped to find a motive or any clue that could tie her to the crime. The pressure on Darling grew as the investigation progressed, but she remained steadfast in her innocence. The investigation into Darling Baxter was thorough, yet many questions remained unanswered. The detectives knew they had to keep digging to uncover the truth behind Johnny Ray's brutal murder. The second suspect in Johnny Ray Baxter's murder was his stepdaughter, Lily Adams. Lily was 18 years old and a freshman at the University of Arkansas, where she was studying psychology. She was known for her outgoing and sociable personality. Her friends described her as bright and ambitious, always eager to learn new things. Lily had a complicated relationship with her stepfather, Johnny Ray. It was revealed during the investigation that their relationship had evolved into a secret affair. This affair made Lily feel guilty and conflicted, especially as she saw the strain it put on her mother, Darling. Detective Sarah Mitchell Kinsey and James Carter brought Lily in for questioning on April 14, 2015. Lily appeared nervous but cooperative. She admitted to the affair with Johnny Ray, explaining that it had started about 6 months earlier. She said she had been feeling lonely and confused, and Johnny Ray had been there for her. She insisted she never wanted to hurt anyone. During the interrogation, Lily explained how she had confided in a close friend about the affair and her feelings of guilt. This friend, whose name was not disclosed, confirmed Lily's story to the detectives. Lily described the last time she saw Johnny Ray, which was the night before his death. She said they had argued about the affair and the impact it was having on their family. The detectives asked Lily about her whereabouts on the night of the murder. Lily said she had been in a friend's house studying for a midterm exam. Her friend confirmed this alibi, saying that Lily had stayed there until the early morning hours of April 12th. Despite the alibi, the detectives were suspicious of the emotional turmoil that Lily was going through. The police also searched Lily's dorm room and her belongings for any evidence. They found nothing directly linking her to the murder, but they did find several letters and notes between her and Johnny Ray. These notes showed the depth of their relationship and the emotional struggles they both faced. Despite her alibi and the lack of direct evidence, Lily remained a prime suspect due to the affair and the emotional tension it created. The detectives continued to interview her friends and classmates, hoping to find any inconsistencies or new leads. The pressure on Lily grew as the investigation continued, but she maintained her innocence and expressed deep regret for the affair. The investigation into Lily Adams was thorough, but the detectives still had many questions. They knew they had to keep digging to find the truth behind Johnny Ray Baxter's brutal murder. On April 17, 2015, 5 days after Johnny Ray Baxter's murder, the police received a significant break in the case. It was a cool, cobblestone morning when a jogger discovered a suspicious item in the park near Beaver Lake. He noticed a plastic bag partially buried under some leaves near a bench. Curious, he opened it and found a blood-stained shirt and a pair of gloves. He immediately called the police, and within minutes, patrol officers Karen Lewis and Tom Martinez arrived at the scene. They secured the area and called in detectives Sarah Mitchell Kinsey and James Carter. The detectives quickly assessed the situation and bagged the items for forensic analysis. The detectives were cautious, but hopeful that this new evidence would provide a breakthrough in the case. They brought the items back to the Fayetteville Police Department's forensic lab. Forensic analysts found that the blood on the shirt matched Johnny Ray's DNA. Additionally, the gloves had fingerprints that were not Johnny Ray's. This new evidence shifted the focus of the investigation. The detectives revisited their list of suspects and re-examined their alibis. They also reviewed the surveillance footage from the park and nearby areas. This extensive review led them to a surprising discovery. A figure matching Lily Adams's description was seen entering the park late on the night of the murder. Detectives Mitchell Kinsey and Carter brought Lily in for a second round of questioning. This time, Lily was visibly more nervous. She claimed she had gone to the park to clear her head and had no idea about the bloody items. The detectives pressed her for more details, but Lily stuck to her story, albeit shyly. The forensic team continued their analysis and found another critical piece of evidence: hair fibers on the gloves that matched Darling Baxter's DNA. This discovery complicated the case further and indicated the possible involvement of both mother and daughter. On April 18, 2015, the detectives called Darling back for questioning. She seemed calm but concerned when presented with the new evidence. Darling admitted to knowing about the gloves but insisted she had nothing to do with the murder. She said she had worn the gloves while gardening and couldn't explain how they ended up near Beaver Lake. The police were now more determined than ever to solve the case. They knew they were close to uncovering the truth, but needed to carefully piece together the final puzzle. The discovery of the new evidence was a pivotal moment in the investigation, providing crucial leads and intensifying the search for Johnny Ray Baxter's murderer. Hey, true crime case solvers, interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And if you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate, leave us a comment. Stay safe, true crime case solvers. The third suspect in the murder of Johnny Ray Baxter was his ex-wife, Diddy Baxter. Diddy, aged 46, was known for her hot-tempered and aggressive nature. She had a contentious relationship with Johnny Ray and had never approved of his marriage to Darling. Diddy lived in Fayetteville and worked as a manager at a local grocery store, Harp's Food Stores. Detective Sarah Mitchell Kinsey and James Carter decided to bring Diddy in for questioning on April 19, 2015. Diddy arrived at the police station appearing defiant and uncooperative. She had a reputation for speaking her mind and not holding back her opinions. During the interrogation, Diddy admitted that she and Johnny Ray had a rocky relationship. She described their marriage as tumultuous and full of arguments. Diddy expressed her disdain for Darling, calling her a homewrecker and blaming her for the end of her marriage. However, Diddy vehemently denied any involvement in Johnny Ray's murder. The detectives pressed Diddy about her whereabouts on the night of April 11, 2015. Diddy claimed she was at home watching TV and drinking wine. She mentioned watching an episode of Dancing with the Stars and going to bed early. There were no witnesses to confirm her alibi, which made the detectives suspicious. The police searched Diddy's home for any evidence that could link her to the crime. They found a few items of interest, including a set of gardening gloves, similar to the ones found at the park. However, forensic analysis showed no blood or DNA on these gloves. Despite her alibi and the lack of direct evidence, the detectives continued to probe Diddy's potential motive. They discovered that Diddy had recently learned about Johnny Ray's affair with Lily, which added another layer of tension and potential anger. Friends and co-workers told the detectives that Diddy had been particularly upset and vocal about the affair, calling Johnny Ray a disgrace and expressing her anger to anyone who would listen. The detectives also interviewed Diddy's neighbors, who reported hearing loud arguments coming from her house in the days leading up to the murder. One neighbor, Mrs. Everly, said she heard Diddy yelling about betrayal and lies. Although Diddy remained a suspect, the detectives found it challenging to gather enough evidence to charge her. She was aggressive during the interrogation but maintained her innocence. The detectives knew they needed more concrete evidence to link her to the crime. The investigation into Diddy Baxter added another layer of complexity to the case as the detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading to Johnny Ray's murder. On April 21, 2015, the breakthrough in Johnny Ray Baxter's murder case finally came after days of investigating. Detective Sarah Mitchell Kinsey and James Carter found a crucial piece of evidence: A surveillance camera from a nearby gas station had captured footage of Darling Baxter driving toward Beaver Lake late on the night of the murder. This was a significant lead that contradicted Darling's alibi. Detectives Mitchell, Kinsey, and Carter reviewed the footage carefully. It showed Darling's car, a blue Honda Civic, passing the gas station at around 11:30 p.m. on April 11th. This placed her near the crime scene at the crucial time. With this new evidence, the detectives were confident they had found Johnny Ray's killer. On the morning of April 22, 2015, the police arrived at Darling Baxter's workplace, Razorback Accounting. It was a sunny day, and the local news stations, including KFSM and KNWA, were already covering the latest developments in the case. Darling was in her office when the police entered. She looked surprised but remained composed as they informed her of her arrest for the murder of her husband. As Darling was led out in handcuffs, she maintained her innocence. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. The affair between Johnny Ray and Lily had driven Darling into a fit of rage. She felt deeply betrayed by both her husband and her daughter. The detectives believed that on the night of the murder, Darling confronted Johnny Ray. The confrontation escalated into violence, and Darling grabbed a hammer, fatally striking him multiple times. Darling's arrest shocked the community. Neighbors and friends couldn't believe that the hard-working, intelligent woman they knew was capable of such a violent act. The news spread quickly, with headlines in the Fayetteville Observer and segments on local news stations detailing the arrest. Johnny Ray's family had mixed reactions. Some were relieved that the murderer had been caught, while others were devastated by the betrayal. Lily was particularly heartbroken. She had lost both her stepfather and her mother in a matter of days. The emotional toll on the family was immense. As Darling was taken to the police station, she continued to deny her involvement. However, the detectives were confident in their findings. The surveillance footage combined with the forensic evidence and Darling's conflicting statements painted a clear picture of her guilt. The community of Fayetteville was left to grapple with the tragic events. Johnny Ray Baxter's murder had uncovered deep family secrets and left a lasting impact on those who knew him. The police had solved the case, but the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. The trial of Darling Baxter for the murder of her husband, Johnny Ray Baxter, began on July 15, 2015, at the Washington County Courthouse in Fayetteville. The courtroom was packed with reporters from local news stations like KFSM and KNWA, as well as concerned members of the community. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Robert Stevens, a 45-year-old with a reputation for being tough and relentless in the courtroom. He argued that Darling's motive for the murder was her discovery of the affair between Johnny Ray and Lily. Stevens painted a picture of a woman pushed to the breaking point by betrayal and emotional turmoil. He presented the surveillance footage of Darling's car near Beaver Lake, the forensic evidence from the crime scene, and the conflicting statements she had given to the police. On the other side, the defense was led by attorney Michelle Williams, a 39-year-old known for her calm demeanor and sharp legal mind. She argued that Darling was innocent and that the evidence was circumstantial. Williams suggested that someone else could have committed the murder, perhaps out of jealousy or anger. She questioned the reliability of the surveillance footage and pointed out that no witnesses had seen Darling commit the crime. Throughout the trial, Johnny Ray's family sat in the front row, watching the proceedings with a mixture of anger and sadness. Lily, in particular, struggled with the emotional weight of the trial. She had lost her stepfather and now faced the possibility of losing her mother to a long prison sentence. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days before reaching a verdict on August 3, 2015. The jury found Darling Baxter guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was tense as the verdict was read. Darling showed little emotion, while Johnny Ray's family wept and hugged each other. The local news immediately reported the verdict, and the story was covered extensively in the Fayetteville Observer. Judge Lisa Everly sentenced Darling to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She stated that the evidence clearly showed Darling's guilt, and that the crime was a result of intense personal betrayal and anger. The judge expressed sympathy for Johnny Ray's family and hoped the sentence would bring them some measure of closure. The reaction to the verdict was mixed. Some in the community felt justice had been served, while others believed the sentence was too harsh, considering Darling's difficult past and the emotional stress she was under. Johnny Ray's family, however, felt a sense of relief that the ordeal was over and that the person responsible for his death was held accountable. The trial and sentencing marked the end of a tragic chapter for the Baxter family and the community of Fayetteville. The murder and its aftermath had left deep emotional scars, but the verdict provided a sense of justice and a step toward healing. After Darling Baxter's trial and sentencing, life slowly began to return to normal for those involved in Johnny Ray Baxter's tragic murder case. For Darling, now serving her sentence at the Arkansas Department of Correction, life took on a stark routine. She was allowed limited visits from family and friends, with strict rules governing her daily activities. The media coverage surrounding the trial gradually faded, replaced by new stories and events in Fayetteville, like the annual Bikes, Blues, and BBQ motorcycle rally. Lily Adams, now 19, returned to the University of Arkansas to continue her studies in psychology. She struggled with guilt and grief over her role in the affair that ultimately led to her stepfather's death. Lily sought counseling to help her cope with the emotional aftermath and worked hard to rebuild relationships with her family. She distanced herself from media attention, focusing on her studies and volunteer work at local animal shelters. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Mitchell Kinsey received recognition for her role in solving the high-profile case. She continued her work at the Fayetteville Police Department, investigating other crimes and mentoring younger detectives. Detective James Carter transferred to the Northwest Arkansas Drug Task Force, where he applied his investigative skills to combating drug-related crimes in the region. In the community of Fayetteville, the impact of Johnny Ray's murder lingered. Neighbors and friends remembered him as a friendly and successful real estate agent who loved sailing on Beaver Lake. The local Rotary Club held a memorial service in his honor, and a plaque was installed at the Fayetteville Town Center to commemorate his life and contributions to the community. Johnny Ray's family, especially his first wife, Diddy, found solace in each other's company and support. Diddy focused on her career at Harp's Food Stores and became involved in local charity events, like the Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure in Fayetteville. She remained vigilant about keeping her family close and supporting her grandchildren, who missed their stepfather dearly. As time passed, the scars left by Johnny Ray's murder began to heal, though the memory of the tragic events of April 2015 remained a part of Fayetteville's history. The community rallied around the Baxter family, offering support and understanding as they moved forward from the ordeal. This tragic case of love, betrayal, and murder serves as a stark reminder of the complexity of human relationships and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions. Thank you for joining us on this episode of True Crime Case Files. Stay tuned for more stories that uncover the darkest corners of the human psyche. Until next time, stay safe. In the vibrant city of Sacramento, California, a dynamic 34-year-old woman named Laura Samuels had established herself as a formidable marketing executive. She was employed by the prestigious firm Bright Ideas Marketing, where her ambition and relentless pursuit of success were widely recognized. Despite her demanding career, Laura's warm and amiable demeanor struck a perfect balance, endearing her to both colleagues and friends. An ardent enthusiast of the great outdoors, Laura particularly enjoyed hiking and camping. Her favorite destinations were the breathtaking Yosemite National Park and the serene Lake Tahoe. She also found joy in her local book club, where she reveled in discussions about her beloved novels penned by Joyce Lehman. Laura was known among her circle as a benevolent soul, always eager to lend a helping hand. Her radiant smile was infectious, capable of illuminating even the gloomiest of rooms. As June 2010 approached, Laura was immersed in planning a special camping trip with her family. The anticipation was palpable among her husband, Carl, and their two children, 10-year-old Ponderosa and 8-year-old Velveeta. Laura had already gathered their camping essentials, including a tent, sleeping bags, and food supplies. She had even purchased a new pair of hiking boots from LL Bean for the excursion. On the professional front, Laura was on the cusp of a significant promotion. Her superior had subtly indicated that she was in line to lead the marketing department, a role she had long aspired to. After years of dedication and hard work, this opportunity was a dream realized for Laura. She eagerly awaited the challenges and prospects that lay ahead. Family was of paramount importance to Laura. Her parents, residing in the neighboring town of Vacaville, frequently visited to spend quality time with their grandchildren. Although her sister Emily lived in Los Angeles, they maintained regular communication through phone calls and emails. Laura treasured these bonds and ensured she remained closely connected with her loved ones. The morning of June 14, 2010, began like any other for Carl Samuels. He arose early, preparing for his day as the sun cast its brilliant rays over Sacramento. However, he soon noticed that Laura was absent from their bed. Assuming she might be in the kitchen, he descended the stairs only to discover a horrifying sight. Laura's lifeless body lay in the living room, the victim of a brutal assault with a hairbrush. Her face bore the cruel marks of the struggle. In a state of disbelief and shock, Carl dialed 911, his voice trembling as he attempted to convey the tragic scene before him. The reality that his beloved wife was no more was too devastating to comprehend. Upon receiving the distress call on June 14, 2010, the Sacramento police swiftly dispatched officers and emergency services to the Samuels residence. The 911 operator maintained composure while gathering crucial information. As Carl sat beside Laura's body, overwhelmed by a whirlwind of grief, confusion, and disbelief, he awaited the arrival of help with tears streaming down his face. Within minutes, emergency responders appeared on the scene. Paramedics sadly confirmed Laura's demise, while police officers promptly secured the area. Carl's visible distress rendered him unable to coherently answer questions, as he repeatedly expressed his profound love for Laura and incomprehension towards the motive behind her harm. In cases of this nature, detectives are often compelled to consider the spouse as a person of interest, despite acknowledging Carl's anguish. As curiosity piqued among the neighbors, a crowd began to assemble outside the home. The news rapidly circulated throughout the community, with local television stations, such as KC3 broadcasting reports that highlighted Laura's status as a cherished community member. By late morning, a flurry of activity enveloped the once peaceful dwelling. Forensic experts arrived to gather additional evidence, meticulously dusting for fingerprints and collecting samples from the crime scene. The hairbrush, a chilling piece of evidence, was carefully sealed in a bag. Every detail was painstakingly documented to ensure a comprehensive investigation. As the day unfolded, the harsh reality of Laura's passing weighed heavily on her friends and family. An outpouring of shock and sorrow filled phone calls and messages, leaving everyone who knew her grappling with the tragic loss of a beloved wife, mother, and friend. The disbelief was palpable as the community tried to come to terms with her untimely demise. Detective Patricia Johnson and her partner, Detective Mark Hernandez, took command of the investigation. Detective Johnson, renowned for her keen eye and unwavering dedication, and Detective Hernandez, celebrated for his meticulous and exhaustive approach, led the team. The crime scene presented a harrowing tableau. Laura Samuels lay on the living room floor, the victim of a brutal assault with a nearby hairbrush. Blood stained the carpet, and the disarray of toppled furniture pointed to a violent struggle. The otherwise pristine scene suggested an attempt by the perpetrator to conceal their tracks. The detectives initiated their investigation by securing the area to preserve the integrity of the evidence. They methodically documented the scene, capturing photographs and compiling detailed notes. Following their arrival, forensic experts proceeded to collect physical evidence. They dusted for fingerprints on the hairbrush, furniture, and door handles, and obtained samples of blood and potential DNA evidence from the scene. Detective Johnson spoke with Carl Samuels, who was visibly shaken and in tears. She asked him about the events leading up to the discovery of Laura's body. Carl explained that he had woken up early to get ready for work and found Laura in the living room. He had no idea who could have done this to her. While Johnson interviewed Carl, Detective Hernandez examined the rest of the house. He looked for any signs of forced entry, but found none. This suggested that Laura might have known her attacker and let them in. Hernandez noted the absence of defensive wounds on Laura's hands, which indicated she was caught off guard. Neighbors began to gather outside, watching the police activity. Some were interviewed by the detectives, but no one reported seeing anything unusual that morning. The community was shocked and scared, as Laura was well-liked, and her death was a terrible blow to everyone who knew her. By noon, the detectives had collected all the evidence they could find. They bagged the hairbrush and other items for further analysis at the crime lab. The coroner arrived to take Laura's body for an autopsy, which would provide more details about the time and cause of death. Detective Johnson and Hernandez spent the rest of the day reviewing the evidence and planning their next steps. They knew they had a difficult case ahead of them, but were determined to find justice for Laura and her family. Carl Samuels, the husband of Laura Samuels, was the first suspect in the investigation. Carl was 37 years old and worked as a software developer. He was known to be intelligent, but also quite introverted, often spending more time with his computer than with people. Carl was a devoted husband, but in recent months he had become distant and stressed, which friends noticed. The police brought Carl in for questioning at the Sacramento Police Department on June 15, 2010. Detective Patricia Johnson and Detective Mark Hernandez led the interrogation. Carl appeared exhausted and heartbroken. His eyes were red from crying, and he seemed genuinely distraught over Laura's death. Detective Johnson started by asking Carl about his relationship with Laura. Carl explained that they had been married for 12 years and had 2 children, Ponderosa, age 10, and Vita, age 8. He admitted that their marriage had been strained lately due to their decision to participate in a wife-swap sex fantasy. Carl had pushed Laura to participate in this fantasy with another couple, Jessica and Kenneth Platers. This obsession had caused tension between him and Laura. When asked about the night of Laura's death, Carl stated that he had been working late on a state government contract for his job at a well-known tech company, TechWave. He said he went to bed around midnight and didn't wake up until the next morning when he found Laura's body. His alibi was weak, since he had been home alone during the time of the murder. Detective Hernandez asked Carl about his relationship with Jessica Platers. Carl admitted that he found Jessica attractive and that they had sex with each other many times, but he insisted that it had nothing to do with the murder. He was visibly uncomfortable and kept fidgeting during this part of the questioning. The detectives noted Carl's stress and anxiety, but also his apparent grief. They asked him about any recent arguments with Laura. Carl mentioned that they had fought about the wife-swap fantasy and his interest in sexual experimentation a few days before her death. Laura had been upset and told him she didn't want to participate anymore, which had frustrated Carl. Despite his emotional state, Carl cooperated fully with the police. He provided access to his phone and computer for further investigation. Detectives Johnson and Hernandez were cautious, but still considered him a suspect. They needed more evidence to either confirm his involvement or clear him of suspicion. As the questioning concluded, Carl was allowed to go home, but was instructed not to leave town. The detectives continued to gather information, knowing they had to explore all possible angles in the case to find the truth about who killed Laura Samuels. The second suspect in the investigation was Jessica Platers, a 32-year-old yoga instructor. Jessica was outgoing and charismatic, known for her sociable nature. She taught yoga at a popular studio in downtown Sacramento called Zen Flow Yoga. Many people in the community admired her free-spirited attitude and ability to connect with others. Jessica was part of the wife swap arrangement with Laura and Carl Samuels and her husband, Kenneth. She had developed an unhealthy obsession with Carl and had been trying to convince him to leave Laura for her. Detectives Patricia Johnson and Mark Hernandez brought Jessica in for questioning on June 16th at the Sacramento Police Department. When she arrived, Jessica was wearing casual yoga attire and looked calm and composed. Detective Johnson began by asking Jessica about her relationship with Carl. Jessica openly admitted that she loved having sex with Carl and had strong feelings for him. She said she believed Carl felt the same way but was torn because of his marriage to Laura. When questioned about the night of Laura's death, Jessica claimed she was at home with her husband, Kenneth. She said they had watched a movie and gone to bed early. However, Detective Hernandez pointed out that there were no witnesses to confirm her alibi, making it weak. Jessica then talked about the wife swap arrangement. She explained that it was Carl's idea and that Laura had reluctantly agreed. Jessica saw it as a great opportunity to have sex with Carl. She admitted that she had been trying to convince Carl to leave Laura, but denied any involvement in Laura's death. The detectives noticed that while Jessica was cooperative, she seemed to be hiding something. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the seriousness of the situation. They pressed her about her obsession with Carl and whether it could have driven her to harm Laura. Jessica maintained her innocence, insisting she would never hurt anyone. During the interrogation, Jessica's phone records were examined. They revealed multiple calls and messages to Carl, including some sent on the night of the murder. This evidence raised further suspicion, showing Jessica's intense interest in Carl. Despite her cooperation, Jessica's obsession with Carl and her weak alibi made her a strong suspect. The detectives knew they needed more concrete evidence to either implicate or exonerate her. They continued to investigate her background, looking for any clues that could link her to Laura's murder. As the questioning ended, Jessica was allowed to leave, but was instructed not to leave town. Detectives Johnson and Hernandez remained determined to uncover the truth, knowing that Jessica's possible involvement in the crime needed to be thoroughly explored. On June 18, 2010, 4 days after Laura Samuels' tragic death, new evidence emerged that gave the investigation a crucial breakthrough. That morning, it was cloudy and cool in Sacramento. Detective Patricia Johnson received a call from a neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Turner, who lived 2 houses down from the Samuels' home. Mrs. Turner mentioned she had found something unusual while walking her dog in a nearby park called L Park. Mrs. Turner had noticed a discarded bag under a bush near a picnic area. Inside the bag, she found a pair of bloody gloves and a smartphone. She immediately called the police. Detectives Johnson and Hernandez arrived at the scene within 30 minutes. They carefully collected the bag and its contents, placing them in evidence bags to avoid contamination. Back at the Sacramento Police Department, the detectives examined the new evidence. The bloody gloves were sent to the crime lab for DNA analysis. The smartphone, which was locked, was taken to the tech department to be unlocked and analyzed. Detective Hernandez noted that the phone was a newer model, an iPhone 4, which had just been released a few weeks earlier. While waiting for the results, the detectives reviewed their notes on the case. The bloody gloves suggested the killer had tried to dispose of evidence far from the crime scene. The smartphone could potentially belong to the killer or someone connected to the crime. Later that afternoon, the crime lab called with the DNA results. The blood on the gloves matched Laura Samuels, but there was also another DNA profile on the inside of the gloves. The profile did not match Carl Samuels, which was a significant finding. The tech department also managed to unlock the smartphone. It was registered to Jessica Platers, the yoga instructor and second suspect. The detectives found numerous messages and call logs between Jessica and Carl, including some from the night of the murder. Additionally, there were messages that showed Jessica's increasing frustration and jealousy toward Laura. Detective Johnson and Hernandez were surprised by this new evidence. The messages revealed that Jessica had been trying to manipulate Carl into leaving Laura, but her efforts had been unsuccessful. They now had a stronger case against Jessica, as the gloves and the smartphone linked her more directly to the crime. The detectives planned their next steps carefully. They knew they needed to bring Jessica back in for questioning with this new evidence. The case was starting to come together, but they still needed to ensure all details were thoroughly investigated. As the day ended, the detectives had a renewed sense of purpose. The new evidence had provided a crucial lead, and they were determined to follow it to uncover the full truth behind Laura Samuels' murder. Hey, true crime case solvers, are you interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case, or do you have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Stay safe, true crime case solvers. The third suspect in the investigation was Kenneth Platers, a 34-year-old personal trainer. Kenneth was known for his confidence and charm. He worked at a popular gym in Sacramento called Fit Life Gym, where he trained clients and participated in competitive sports. Kenneth was supportive of his wife Jessica's free-spirited nature and had participated in the wife swap arrangement with Laura and Carl Samuels. However, Kenneth had become increasingly jealous and suspicious. Detectives Patricia Johnson and Mark Hernandez brought Kenneth in for questioning on June 19, 2010. Kenneth arrived at the Sacramento Police Department wearing a Fit Life Gym t-shirt and jeans. He appeared nervous, but tried to remain composed. Detective Johnson began by asking Kenneth about his relationship with Jessica. Kenneth explained that they had been married for 8 years and had a mostly happy marriage. However, he admitted that the wife swap arrangement had caused tension. Kenneth confessed that he had become uncomfortable with the arrangement, as he was developing feelings for Carl Samuels and felt left out. When asked about the night of Laura's murder, Kenneth claimed he was at home with Jessica. He said they had watched a movie, Iron Man 2, which had been released a few weeks earlier, and went to bed early. Kenneth's alibi was the same as Jessica's, but the detectives were skeptical due to the new evidence linking Jessica to the crime. Detective Hernandez questioned Kenneth about his feelings towards Laura. Kenneth stated that he liked Laura and had no reason to harm her. He seemed genuinely saddened about Laura's death and insisted he had nothing to do with it. However, his jealousy and discomfort with the wife swap arrangement were noted by the detectives. The detectives then presented Kenneth with the new evidence: the bloody gloves and the smartphone found in El Park. Kenneth was visibly shocked and denied any knowledge of the items. He insisted that he had no reason to hurt Laura and was being truthful about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Despite his cooperation, Kenneth's weak alibi and growing jealousy made him a suspect. The detectives decided to keep a close eye on him while they continued to investigate Jessica. They believed that Kenneth might have more information about the crime and Jessica's involvement. As the questioning ended, Kenneth was allowed to leave, but was instructed not to leave town. Detectives Johnson and Hernandez were determined to uncover the full truth, knowing that the evidence was leading them closer to solving the case. On June 20, 2010, the Sacramento police made a breakthrough in the Laura Samuel case. After carefully examining all the evidence, they identified Jessica Platers as the murderer. Jessica, a 32-year-old yoga instructor, had developed an unhealthy obsession with Carl Samuels, Laura's husband. Jessica believed that if Laura were out of the picture, Carl would be with her. The detectives pieced together how Jessica went about killing Laura. On the night of June 13, 2010, Jessica had gone to the Samuels' home. She knew Carl would be working late and Laura would be alone. Using a hairbrush, she brutally beat Laura, ensuring there was no noise to alert the neighbors. Jessica then staged the scene to look like a struggle, hoping it would mislead the police. Jessica's motive was her deep obsession with Carl and her desire to replace Laura in his life. She thought eliminating Laura would make Carl choose her. Additionally, she wanted to frame her own husband, Kenneth, for the murder, ensuring both her romantic rival and unsatisfactory husband were out of the picture. On June 20th, around 2 p.m., Detective Patricia Johnson and Detective Mark Hernandez went to Jessica's home to arrest her. The sky was overcast, reflecting the somber mood. Jessica was taken by surprise. She had been teaching a yoga class at Zen Flow Yoga when the detectives arrived. When they informed her of the arrest, Jessica initially tried to maintain her composure, but soon broke down crying and pleading her innocence. The police handcuffed Jessica and escorted her out of the studio. The news spread quickly, and local media, including KC3 and Fox 40, covered the arrest. The community was shocked as they watched Jessica, a once-admired yoga instructor, being taken away by the police. Laura's family reacted with a mix of relief and sorrow upon hearing of Jessica's arrest. Carl Samuels was devastated by the betrayal, realizing that someone he knew and trusted was responsible for his wife's death. He struggled to come to terms with the loss and the horrific manner in which it happened. Laura's children, Ponderosa and Belita, were too young to fully understand, but they sensed the gravity of the situation. As Jessica was taken to the Sacramento Police Department, the detectives felt a sense of accomplishment. They had successfully identified and apprehended the person responsible for Laura's brutal murder. However, they knew the case was far from over as they prepared for the upcoming trial. The trial of Jessica Platers began on September 15, 2010, in the Sacramento County Courthouse. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Lisa Kakuro, a 45-year-old known for her sharp legal mind and strong courtroom presence, presented a compelling case against Jessica. Kakuro argued that Jessica's obsession with Carl Samuels and her desire to eliminate Laura as a rival drove her to commit the murder. She detailed the evidence, including the bloody gloves and the smartphone found in L Park, which connected Jessica to the crime scene. On the defense side, attorney Michael Rachmaninoff, a 50-year-old with a reputation for taking on challenging cases, argued that Jessica was innocent and framed by someone else. Rachmaninoff claimed that there was no direct evidence linking Jessica to the murder and that the police had not thoroughly investigated other potential suspects, including Kenneth Platers. He also suggested that the DNA evidence on the gloves could have been planted. During the trial, Laura Samuels' family sat in the courtroom, watching with heavy hearts. Carl Samuels, Laura's husband, appeared distraught, often holding back tears. Their children, Ponderosa and Vita, were not present, as they were too young to witness the trial's emotional intensity. Friends and community members who knew Laura described her as a loving mother and a dedicated professional, making the crime even more heartbreaking. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On September 25, 2010, they returned with a verdict. Jessica Platers was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was filled with a mix of relief and sorrow as the judge announced the verdict. Jessica showed little emotion, maintaining a stoic expression. Her plan to eliminate Laura and frame Kenneth had failed, and she now faced the consequences of her actions. During the sentencing phase, Laura's family members gave emotional statements. Carl spoke about the devastating impact of losing Laura and how it had affected their children. The judge sentenced Jessica Platers to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was seen as just by Laura's family, but it could never fully heal the pain of their loss. The verdict and sentencing had a profound effect on everyone involved. Laura's family felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice had been served. The community, shocked by the crime, began to heal, though the memory of Laura's tragic death lingered. Jessica's conviction sent a message that such a calculated and violent act would not go unpunished. After the trial, life slowly began to move on for everyone involved in the case. Carl Samuels, now a single father, focused on caring for his children, Ponderosa and Vita. He decided to move out of their Sacramento home, seeking a fresh start. They relocated to a smaller town nearby, where they could begin healing away from the painful memories. Carl took a leave of absence from his job at TechWave to spend more time with his children. He enrolled them in a new school and joined a support group for grieving spouses, finding solace in talking to others who had experienced similar losses. He also sought therapy for both himself and his children to help them cope with the trauma of losing Laura. Jessica Platers, now serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole, was transferred to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. In prison, she became isolated, with few visitors and little contact with the outside world. Her obsession with Carl and her misguided actions had led her to a life behind bars, far from the free-spirited yoga instructor she once was. Kenneth Platers, Jessica's husband, struggled to rebuild his life. He left Sacramento and moved to San Francisco, where he found a new job as a personal trainer at a different gym. He sought counseling to deal with his feelings of betrayal and confusion. Kenneth tried to move forward, but he remained deeply affected by the events and the realization that his wife was capable of such violence. In the years following the trial, those touched by Laura's life and tragic death worked to find peace and healing. While the pain of her loss remained, they found ways to move forward, carrying Laura's memory with them and striving to live their lives with the same warmth and determination she had shown. Thank you for joining us on this episode of True Crime Case Files. The tragic story of Laura Samuels reminds us of the dark consequences of obsession and betrayal. Stay tuned for more true crime stories, and remember, always stay vigilant. In the scorching heat of a July afternoon in 2019, the veneer of suburban tranquility was brutally fractured, leaving an indelible mark on the community. The Hendersons, Thaddeus and Margot, found themselves at the epicenter of this calamity. Thaddeus, a 45-year-old investment banker, was renowned for his diligence and active role in the community. His wife, Margot, a 43-year-old part-time yoga instructor, was celebrated for her lively spirit and contagious laughter. They had been a prominent part of the community for over a decade, their seemingly idyllic union the object of admiration for many. The Coopers, Elaine, and her 19-year-old son, Liam, resided in the neighboring house. Elaine, a widow, and Liam, a college sophomore on summer break, had settled in the neighborhood 5 years prior. Despite their somewhat reclusive nature, they were generally held in high regard by their neighbors. No one could have foreseen the cataclysmic collision of these seemingly mundane lives. Thaddeus's life had been fueled by ambition. Born into a working-class family in the rural landscapes of Iowa, he had ascended the social hierarchy through sheer grit and an almost compulsive dedication to work. By his early 30s, he had carved out a niche for himself as an emerging talent in a financial firm. His colleagues respected his incisive analytical skills, and his clients appreciated his straightforward approach to wealth management. Margot, née Sinclair, had followed a different path. Raised in a household that cherished creativity and self-expression by a college professor and an artist, she pursued modern dance at university, nurturing dreams of a stage career. However, a knee injury in her final year thwarted these aspirations, prompting her to shift her focus towards yoga and wellness coaching. In the year 2003, their lives intertwined at a charitable event. Thaddeus, already prosperous but lacking refinement, was instantly captivated by Margot's vivaciousness and allure. For Margot, Thaddeus symbolized security and the assurance of a luxurious lifestyle that would enable her to chase her passions without monetary concerns. A year later, they exchanged vows in a grandiose wedding ceremony that became the topic of discussion among their acquaintances. The initial phase of their matrimony was filled with joy. Thaddeus's profession continued to thrive, and he reveled in offering Margot the lifestyle he believed she merited. Margot, in turn, dedicated herself to being the ideal corporate spouse, organizing dinner parties and participating in social gatherings that were vital for Thaddeus's professional networking. She also started instructing yoga part-time at a high-end studio, discovering satisfaction in aiding others in attaining equilibrium and inner tranquility. However, as time elapsed, fissures started to emerge in their meticulously crafted existence. Thaddeus's working hours began to extend, his ambition driving him to pursue increasingly significant deals and clients. He seldom returned home before 9 p.m., and even when he was physically there, his thoughts were frequently elsewhere, incessantly checking his phone for emails or market news. As she neared her 40s, Margot found herself progressively discontented. The yoga sessions and philanthropic committees that once occupied her days now seemed empty. She started to reassess the decisions that had led her to this juncture, pondering if she had exchanged her aspirations for a golden prison. Their inability to bear children, despite numerous attempts, added further tension to their relationship. As the summer of 2019 unfolded, the Hendersons' marriage had devolved into a meticulously preserved pretense. To the external world, they continued to project the image of an ideal couple. Thaddeus persisted in his exceptional performance at work, having recently secured a deal that positioned him for a partnership. Margot's yoga classes attracted more attendees than ever, her pupils drawn to her amiability and seemingly tranquil demeanor. However, in the privacy of their home, they had become practically estranged. Dialogues, when they transpired, were superficial and revolved around timetables and social commitments. Physical closeness had become an infrequent event, each contact burdened with unvoiced grievances and unmet anticipations. Neither Thaddeus nor Margot was prepared to acknowledge, even to themselves, the extent of their estrangement. It was more convenient to uphold the illusion, to perform the roles of a contented couple, than to confront the void that had widened between them. Little did they suspect that this unaddressed rift in their relationship was on the verge of triggering a calamity that would devastate not only their lives, but the entire community of Riverside. The Coopers had relocated to the residence adjacent to the Hendersons in 2014, subsequent to the demise of Elaine Cooper's spouse, Dr. Reginald Cooper, a distinguished oncologist. Reginald had fallen victim to the very ailment he had dedicated his life to combating, leaving Elaine to nurture their son Liam single-handedly. Elaine, a reserved librarian, initially grappled with acclimating to life in the new environment. The relocation from their unassuming dwelling in St. Paul had been essential to evade the recollections that tormented every nook of their former abode. But the opulent suburb seemed foreign to her. She sought refuge in her literature and nurturing the garden that soon became the object of envy among the neighbors. Liam Cooper was 14 at the time of their arrival, a gangly, introverted adolescent, more at ease with technology than with individuals. The shift to a new educational institution had proven challenging, and he frequently found himself the object of ridicule by bullies who derided his second-hand attire and reserved nature. It was during this period that Thaddeus Henderson had extended his support to Liam, providing him with a job mowing lawns and performing miscellaneous tasks around the neighborhood. In the course of the subsequent 5 years, Liam underwent a remarkable transformation. The gawky adolescent matured into a handsome young man, his innate intellect finally discovering an avenue in his computer science curriculum at the university. Despite his burgeoning self-assurance, Liam remained dedicated to his mother. He was concerned about her seclusion and solitude, and made it a priority to return home most weekends, even when his companions were organizing celebrations or excursions. It was during one of these weekend visits in the early days of June that he perceived Margot Henderson in a different light for the first time. Elaine had always been appreciative of the Hendersons' benevolence, especially Margot's endeavors to involve her in community events. She frequently mentioned Margot's magnanimity, oblivious to the intricate emotions simmering beneath the facade of her son's courteous acknowledgments. The ember that kindled the liaison between Margot Henderson and Liam Cooper was as unanticipated as it was fervent. The event occurred on a sultry evening in the early days of June during one of the Hendersons' renowned summer barbecues. Thaddeus, as was customary, was commanding attention near the grill, entertaining his associates with narratives of his latest financial triumph. Margot, feeling particularly detached amidst the gathering, had withdrawn to the relative tranquility of the pool house to replenish the ice bucket. Liam, who had been reluctantly persuaded to attend the gathering by his mother, selected that moment to escape from the clamor and compulsory social interaction. He entered the pool house, unaware that it was occupied, and discovered Margot grappling with a large bag of ice. Their gazes converged, and in that instant, a change occurred. He approached to assist her with the ice, their hands touching. They remained there momentarily immobilized, the chill of the ice starkly contrasting with the warmth intensifying between them. Margot was the one who shattered the silence, her voice husky as she expressed her gratitude. Liam, typically so eloquent, found himself faltering in response. That fleeting encounter established the foundation for what was to unfold. Over the ensuing weeks, Margot and Liam found themselves concocting excuses to spend time together. It commenced innocuously enough, Margot requesting Liam's assistance with her laptop, Liam volunteering to aid in her garden. Each interaction was infused with a subtext of attraction that they both endeavored to disregard. Their inaugural kiss transpired nearly a month subsequent to the barbecue. Liam had been assisting Margot in arranging for one of her yoga sessions in the park. As they concluded, an abrupt summer tempest erupted. They dashed for refuge under a nearby gazebo, chuckling and out of breath as the rain cascaded around them. Margot gazed at Liam and experienced a rush of longing she hadn't felt in years. Before she could reconsider, she inclined towards him and kissed him. From that juncture, their clandestine relationship intensified rapidly. They were imprudent, propelled by a blend of Liam's youthful fervor and Margot's urgency to reclaim her vitality. They convened in concealed locations around the vicinity, in the rear seats of the neighborhood cinema, in a secluded nook of the public library, and most precariously, in the Henderson residence when Thaddeus was occupied at work. Each rendezvous left them yearning for more, the disparity in their ages disregarded in the fervor of their clandestine moments. Margot sensed a revitalization, rediscovering facets of herself she believed were irretrievably lost. Liam, for his part, was captivated by Margot's expertise and the illicit essence of their bond. However, as the summer progressed, the pressure of preserving their secret started to manifest. Close encounters became more frequent. A neighbor nearly discovering them in a clinch, a dubious glance from Elaine when Margot's name surfaced excessively in discussions. The remorse also began to burden them both. Liam grappled with the awareness that he was deceiving Thaddeus, a man who had been consistently benevolent towards him. Margot found herself fabricating more and more lies to her spouse, each falsehood another fracture in the edifice of her matrimony. Yet despite the perils and the guilt, neither appeared capable of terminating the affair. They were ensnared in a maelstrom of ardor and necessity, oblivious to the catastrophic repercussions that loomed on the horizon. July 15, 2019, commenced sweltering and muggy, the atmosphere laden with the portent of an imminent storm. It was a Monday, and Riverside roused to life as its inhabitants prepared for another week of labor and routine. For Thaddeus Henderson, the day initiated like any other. He arose early, donned one of his flawlessly tailored suits, and departed for the office before Margot had even roused from slumber. Margot awoke later, her thoughts already swirling with arrangements for the impending day. Thaddeus had notified her the previous night that he would be occupied at work until late, a significant client dinner that could secure his partnership agreement. For Margot, this signified an opportunity. She dispatched a message to Liam, her pulse quickening as she proposed he visit in the afternoon. Liam, who had been tormented by the affair for several days, perceived the message as an occasion to conclude matters in person. He replied with a succinct "okay," determining to terminate the relationship before the circumstances exacerbated further. The day elapsed sluggishly for both of them. Margot proceeded with the routine of her morning yoga session, her customary tranquility supplanted by a restless energy that her pupils couldn't help but detect. Liam, at his summer occupation, discovered it challenging to concentrate on the coding on his display, his thoughts persistently wandering to Margot and the imminent dialogue. At 2:30 p.m., Liam navigated his way to the adjacent residence, scrutinizing his surroundings cautiously to confirm that none of the neighbors were observing. Margot hastily ushered him inside, her countenance flushed with a blend of exhilaration and apprehension. It was Liam who disrupted the quiet, initiating to express that they needed to converse. However, Margot, misconstruing his objective and impelled by a frantic desire to feel coveted, silenced him with an ardent kiss. Despite his hesitations, Liam discovered himself reciprocating, his determination faltering in the presence of Margot's fervor. What ensued was a haze of discarded attire and entwined limbs as they progressed towards the master bedroom. All contemplations of concluding the affair were momentarily overlooked as they immersed themselves in one another. Concurrently, across the vicinity, Thaddeus Henderson sat in his workplace, scowling at his computer monitor. The statistics for the client presentation were inconsistent, and he recognized he would have to revise a substantial segment of his endeavor. Aggravation escalating, he made an impulsive judgment. He would return home, reorganize, and revisit the office subsequently to complete the task before the dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Thaddeus's vehicle drew into the driveway. He noticed Liam Cooper's dilapidated Honda stationed a short distance down the road but dismissed it. Likely assisting Elaine with some task, he pondered as he unlocked the entrance door. The residence was hushed as he entered, but something seemed amiss. A half-consumed glass of wine rested on the coffee table, unusual for Margot at this time. Then he discerned it, a stifled noise emanating from upstairs. Scowling, he ascended the stairs, the clamor intensifying as he neared the master bedroom. The sight that greeted Thaddeus when he opened the door would be indelibly etched into his recollections. His spouse, the woman he had cherished for 15 years, was in their bed with Liam Cooper, the 19-year-old individual he had guided and trusted. With a thunderous bellow of wrath and anguish, Thaddeus propelled himself forward, his hands, so accustomed to manipulating figures and sealing business transactions, now clenched into fists as he seized Liam, wrenching him off the bed. Margot shrieked, endeavoring to conceal herself and separate the two men, but her attempts were futile. Thaddeus's initial blow struck Liam squarely on the jaw, causing the younger man to stagger backward. Impelled by adrenaline and dread, Liam retaliated. The two men wrestled, colliding into the dresser, scattering framed photographs and knickknacks across the floor. Amidst the pandemonium, no one observed the heavy crystal bookend that tumbled from the dresser's summit. No one detected it until Thaddeus, in a frenzy of uncontrollable fury, seized it and struck it down on Liam's head with a nauseating impact. The resonance appeared to reverberate in the abrupt stillness that ensued. Liam collapsed to the floor, blood rapidly accumulating around his inert form. Margot's shriek penetrated the atmosphere as the complete horror of the events that had just unfolded struck them all. In that instant, as tempestuous clouds amassed outside and sirens echoed in the distance, the destinies of everyone involved were irrevocably altered. The idyllic veneer of Riverside had been demolished, and nothing would ever revert to its former state. The shrill blare of police sirens disrupted the customary serenity of the neighborhood. Residents peeked from behind drapes, inquisitiveness combined with unease, as patrol cars and an ambulance screeched to a standstill in front of the Henderson dwelling. The initial officers on the scene were confronted with a spectacle of horror that would haunt them for years to come. Inside, they discovered a stunned Thaddeus Henderson, his hands stained with blood, seated on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Margot, barely dressed and hysterical, was in the chamber that exhibited all the indications of a brutal altercation: overturned furnishings, fractured glass, and traces of blood on the hardwood floor. Detective Ava Rossi, an experienced member of the police department's homicide division, assumed command of the situation. Her primary concern was obtaining medical assistance for Liam Cooper. As paramedics labored fervently to stabilize him, Rossi initiated the intricate procedure of reconstructing the sequence of events that had culminated in this catastrophe. Thaddeus, still in a condition of disbelief, was apprehended without opposition. Margot was interrogated independently. Their narratives, fragmentary and emotional, depicted a scenario of prolonged marital dissension that had detonated into brutality. As the news disseminated through the vicinity, a throng started to assemble at the police barricade. Among them was Elaine Cooper, who succumbed to sorrow upon learning of her son's critical state. She was promptly escorted to the medical facility, where Liam was engaged in a battle for survival in the intensive care unit. The inquiry progressed swiftly. Forensic specialists scrutinized the Henderson residence, accumulating evidence and capturing images. The crystal bookend, now a prospective instrument of homicide, was meticulously sealed and labeled. Neighbors were questioned, their testimonies offering insight into the dynamics between the Hendersons and the Coopers. One neighbor recollected discerning elevated voices from the Henderson household earlier that afternoon, but had disregarded it as a blaring television. Another mentioned observing Liam entering the Henderson home around 2:30 p.m., noting it because he deemed it unusual given Thaddeus's typical work routine. As darkness descended, the severity of the predicament became evident. Liam Cooper was declared deceased at 9:47 p.m., having never reclaimed consciousness. The allegation against Thaddeus Henderson was escalated from assault to second-degree murder. In the ensuing days, additional information surfaced. Margot, tormented by remorse and subjected to intense examination, confessed to the liaison with Liam. Her declaration, provided through tears at the police headquarters, supplied a timeline of their relationship and the occurrences preceding that tragic afternoon. Thaddeus, counseled by his hastily engaged lawyer, maintained silence. However, his associates at the firm portrayed a portrait of a man under immense strain, laboring extensive hours in quest of a partnership that had appeared within grasp. None, however, had anticipated the extent of his marital tribulations or the potential for aggression that had been unleashed. The prosecution against Thaddeus Henderson was solidifying, but Rossi recognized that in the court of public sentiment, there would be no unequivocal antagonists or protagonists in this narrative. Only casualties, each in their distinct manner, of the secrets and deceptions that had ultimately surfaced in the most calamitous way imaginable. But no one could have foreseen the plot development that was about to unfold, a twist that would astonish everyone, including the Hendersons. The trial of the Hendersons commenced on a brisk autumn morning, half a year subsequent to the incidents that had jolted Riverside to its foundation. The county courthouse, an imposing edifice of crimson brick and pristine columns, was encompassed by journalists and inquisitive spectators. Inside, the strain was tangible as the judge summoned the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, esteemed for her incisive intellect and acerbic eloquence, delineated the state's argument in her inaugural statement. She depicted a vivid portrayal of Thaddeus Henderson as a man engulfed by fury and envy who had savagely assassinated a youthful man in the zenith of his existence. Talbot's expressions were deliberate yet influential, her gaze traversing the jury as she vowed to substantiate Henderson's culpability beyond any plausible uncertainty. Defense attorney Sterling retorted with a chronicle of his own. He depicted Thaddeus as a committed spouse and cornerstone of the society impelled to the verge by a deception of the profoundest nature. Sterling implied that the demise was a heart-rending mishap, the outcome of a disagreement that had escalated beyond control. As the trial advanced, a succession of witnesses assumed the stand. Forensic authorities testified regarding blood splatter configurations and the compulsion necessary to inflict Liam's lethal trauma. Neighbors recounted the occurrences of that day, and character witnesses vouched for the personalities and reputations of both Thaddeus and Liam. However, it was Margot Henderson's evidence that mesmerized the courtroom. Over 2 arduous days on the stand, she disclosed the deterioration of her nuptials and the progression of her bond with Liam. Her voice quivered as she recounted the instant Thaddeus had discovered them and the terror of observing the altercation transpire. Under cross-examination, Sterling endeavored to depict her as an adulterous wife whose deeds had propelled her husband to momentary madness. But Margot remained steadfast, acknowledging her role in the calamity while insisting that nothing vindicated Liam's death. Elaine Cooper's evidence was concise, yet potent. Still bereaved, she discussed her son's benevolence and his aspirations for the future, all curtailed in an act of brutality. Her tranquil poise in the face of unfathomable bereavement stirred numerous in the courtroom to tears. As the trial approached its conclusion, all attention focused on Thaddeus Henderson. Contrary to his attorney's counsel, he opted to testify. His evidence was a juxtaposition of contrasts, instances of ostensible contrition intermingled with glimmers of the indignation that had culminated in Liam's demise. He divulged the strain he had been subjected to at his occupation, the escalating estrangement in his matrimony, and the astonishment of uncovering his spouse's adultery. When narrating the altercation with Liam, Thaddeus asserted he had never intended to inflict severe injury, that he had merely lost command. As the trial advanced, expert witnesses from the realm of psychology were summoned to offer insights into the psyche of those implicated in the calamitous events. Dr. Cho elucidated that Thaddeus's conduct could be comprehended through the perspective of what psychologists label intermittent explosive disorder, distinguished by instances of brutal hostile behavior disproportionate to the scenario. She alluded to Thaddeus's high-pressure employment, his unexpressed marital discontentment, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity as contributing elements to his aggressive outburst. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Cho acknowledged that while these factors could clarify Thaddeus's behavior, they did not pardon it. She underscored that numerous individuals encounter comparable stressors without resorting to aggression. The defense summoned a specialist in marriage and family therapy to bear witness regarding the psychological repercussions of adultery. Fredman outlined the profound sense of deception and identity loss that an individual may encounter upon discovering a spouse's extramarital affair. He compared it to a form of psychological trauma capable of activating acute emotional reactions. The psychological evaluations presented during the trial provided a multifaceted depiction of human conduct and inspiration. They emphasized how an amalgamation of personal background, societal anticipations, and immediate conditions can converge to generate a perfect tempest of catastrophe. Following 7 grueling weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal debates, the destiny of Thaddeus Henderson was entrusted to the jury. As Judge Blackwell dispatched the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense hush descended over the courtroom. After a brief recess to contemplate all aspects, Judge Blackwell reappeared to pronounce her verdict. Referring to the brutal essence of the offense balanced against Thaddeus's absence of prior criminal background and the exceptional circumstances of the case, she condemned him to 18 years in state penitentiary with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Thaddeus was escorted away in handcuffs, the complete gravity of the tragedy appeared to envelop the courtroom. There were no triumphant parties here, only lives irrevocably modified by a moment of fervor and a fleeting instant of brutality. Outside, as reports of the verdict disseminated, The crowd's responses were diverse. Some believed justice had been administered, while others contended the sentence was excessively severe or excessively lenient. But all concurred on one issue. The occurrences that had unfurled in Riverside would leave an enduring imprint on the community for years to follow.